Ruel jolts awake choking for air, his chest locked tight and his head pounding like he ran himself to death. When he looks around, the portrait, wooden door, and canopy bed make it obvious this is not his room at all. He throws off the blanket, sees a withered arm like a dried branch, and immediately tries to reach a mirror. The moment he tries to stand, his weak body gives out, and he crashes before his feet even touch the floor. A butler in black rushes in, calls him Ruelnim, and lifts him back onto the bed with practiced ease. Hearing his own name confirmed, Ruel realizes with dread that he may really be in the body of Ruel's Soteria. Cassian says the fever dropped only this morning, feels his forehead through white gloves, and decides to fetch medicine right away. Ruel grabs him with his twig-thin arm and forces out the only thing he needs first, a mirror. Left alone for a moment, he pieces it together, and remembers exactly who Ruel's Soteria was in the novel, a sick noble who dies in the first volume. When Cassian returns with the mirror, the reflection confirms the nightmare. He is a gaunt, gray-haired shell of a young nobleman. He accepts the ugly truth fast. He really became the useless, dying noble Ruel's Soteria. Cassian keeps up the loyal butler act, but Ruel already knows the concern on that face is fake. When Ruel struggles to breathe again, Cassian hands him a tube called the breath and tells him to inhale slowly through the magic tool. The tool loosens the crushing pressure in his chest, and Ruel quietly decides this thing is his new lifeline. Instead of refusing food, Ruel says he has an appetite today, and Cassian happily goes to bring a meal and medicine. The second Cassian leaves, Ruel shudders and remembers the real problem. This butler is an assassin sent by his cousin Mineta to murder him. He recalls the setup clearly. Sickly Ruel was isolated from society, shoved to the edge of the territory, and stripped of Soteria by his cousin's scheme. A violent coughing fit twists his chest, reminding him that this body is so broken he may die before he can do anything. Even with the novel unfinished and the future unknown, he makes a simple first decision: live first, no matter what. Later, Ruel forces down a bland meal in bed while Cassian stands beside him wearing that same eerie smile. Ruel abruptly tests him by asking if Cassian really wants him to live. Then he drops the act completely and tells Cassian to stop pretending, because this fake loyalty is getting annoying. Ruel asks the real question out loud: when exactly are you planning to kill me? Caught but not shaken, Cassian laughs, drags over a chair, and coolly admits the plan was to let Ruel die in 2 weeks and blame the illness. Ruel names Mineta Soteria as the mastermind, and Cassian confirms the greedy cousin arranged everything. Cassian is more disturbed by one thing: stupid, passive Ruel somehow figured this out overnight. When Cassian mocks him with a disbelieving you, Ruel snaps back that he is the Lord of Soteria and orders him to address him properly. Cassian bursts out laughing, drops today's medicine beside the tray, and bluntly says Ruel will die today without it. Ruel answers with unnerving certainty that he will not die, and that confidence finally makes Cassian pay attention. Then Ruel flips the whole situation and tells Cassian that from now on, he will be the one protecting him. Ruel names the real bait, the heirloom sword Turbulent Day, the legendary blade Cassian wants more than anything. Ruel makes Cassian pour water, then reveals Mineta cannot hand over the sword because only the current family head knows where it is. That means Cassian has been cheated, and Ruel drives the point home by calling him an idiot right to his face. Seeing the opening, Ruel offers a deal. He will give Cassian Turbulent Day in exchange for loyal service as his butler until he dies. To make it binding, Ruel proposes a mana contract, a normal rule in this world that Cassian cannot brush off. Cassian immediately likes the bargain, because from his point of view serving a man about to die should be easy money for a legendary sword. Ruel tries to use a fake cough to sell the deal, but it turns real and bloody, making his vow to protect Soteria sound painfully sincere. That line lands exactly where Ruel aimed, and Cassian's tone turns serious as he offers the medicine and moves toward agreement. The mana contract is concluded smoothly, trading Turbulent Day for Cassian's loyal service until Ruel dies. Even after securing Cassian, Ruel keeps his real goal to himself: survive long enough to chase the scattered power left behind by the hero. The new arrangement turns almost absurd when Cassian calmly peels an apple at Ruel's bedside like a real butler. When Ruel asks the date, and hears it is September 11th, he realizes another assassination attempt is due next week. Then Ruel remembers the hero exists in this world too, and immediately decides he wants nothing to do with the protagonist's trouble. Ruel asks who else has been around him, and Cassian casually admits there were 5 others in the mansion before he killed them himself. Ruel makes the new rules clear. From now on, a butler's job includes keeping his master safe from every assassin, not just being the first one to strike. When Ruel presses about more killers, Cassian's killing intent slips out for an instant, and Ruel's weak body reacts so badly his chest seizes. Cassian immediately apologizes, sweating under the force of the contract as he learns the binding really will punish him for harming Ruel. Once Ruel steadies his breathing, Cassian calmly admits he killed every assassin inside the mansion because he would not let anyone else touch his prey. Ruel orders him to wipe out the rest outside the house too, and Cassian accepts the chore like an inconvenient errand. They settle the cover story too. Cassian will keep sending Mineta the same weekly condition reports describing Ruel as getting worse. Then Cassian drops a worse problem on him. Mineta is coming tomorrow for his regular visit between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. Ruel looks out at the setting sun and decides that before facing his cousin, he has to try leaving this room tomorrow. As another wave of sickness hits, Cassian lays him down and tells him not to rush his short life by trying anything reckless. Ruel stubbornly repeats that he is going out tomorrow and refuses to lie down quietly like a man already dead. Cassian finally gives in, mistaking Ruel's resolve for the last flare of a dying man, and bows as if accepting his master's final wish. Once he is alone, Ruel is too exhausted to think through Cassian's strange mood and eventually blacks out under the pain. That night, Cassian leaves the sleeping Ruel behind and slips into the mansion grounds humming as he prepares to kill the remaining flies. Using a tracking ability tied to lingering traces, he reads the surroundings and melts through the shadows like a panther hunting in his own yard. He appears behind one hidden assassin at the flower bed and kills him in a single clean strike before the man can even react. Without causing any disturbance, Cassian hunts down all 5 marked intruders and returns to the first spot knowing only 3 remain. The last 3 rush him together, but Cassian cuts all their necks in an instant and ends the fight before it even begins. Afterward he summons a subordinate, orders a full cleanup as punishment for missing 8 infiltrators, and reminds his guild that the Lord is going out tomorrow. On his way back, Cassian casually decides what lie to send his former employer next. Tell Mineta the assassins simply fought each other. At dawn, Ruel wakes in pain as Cassian pulls back the curtains and urges him to hurry if he wants to go out before Mineta shows up. Ruel tries to sit up on his own, but his sick body gives out so badly that he collapses back onto the bed cursing it. Without fuss, Cassian lifts Ruel carefully, gives him water and medicine, and tends to him with the practiced ease of someone who has done this many times. Once Cassian leaves to fetch food, Ruel finally looks around and notices just how neglected his so-called manor really is. Even so, Ruel steels himself with a simple goal: get the power hidden here, survive this disease, and finally live a normal life. After a light meal, Ruel changes to go out and immediately mocks Cassian for dressing him in clothes so loose they barely look like his. Their banter turns sharp and revealing, because the fact that even the smallest spare clothes are too much for Ruel drives home how badly Soteria has already fallen. Cassian returns with a wheelchair-like chair, lifts Ruel into it, and asks where he wants to go. Ruel tells him to take him to the backyard, and Cassian can only stare at that strange destination in surprise. The trip ends in a weed-choked backyard, and Ruel calmly praises Cassian for at least cleaning away the blood from the earlier assassin fight. As Cassian worries he should have tidied the place better, Ruel scans the yard and locks onto one specific tree. To Ruel, that ugly tree is everything, because he knows the hero's hidden recovery power is sleeping inside it. Ruel gives a single order to cut it down, and Cassian obeys without argument. The tree crashes to the ground, revealing a thumb-shaped sculpture buried at its base. Ruel reaches for the sculpture before Cassian can stop him, desperate to seize the one ability he needs to stay alive. The moment Ruel touches it, the world freezes and a trial begins, asking if he truly knows pain. Ruel answers with absolute certainty, because in this ruined body he knows pain better than anyone. A hand of light brushes over him, accepts his answer, and grants him the power to overcome pain. The light sinks into Ruel's body, the relic vanishes, and time starts moving again. Cassian stares at him in alarm, but Ruel only looks at the fallen tree with a serious, unreadable face. When Cassian steps away to fetch a blanket, Ruel finally drops the act and curses, because the power did not cure his disease at all. To test what he really got, Ruel picks up a sharp stone and deliberately cuts his own leg. The wound bleeds for a moment, then a warm force moves through him and the injury closes right in front of his eyes. By the time Cassian returns with a blanket, Ruel has figured out the ugly truth. The power only speeds recovery after injury, so his plan worked only halfway. Back in bed, Ruel forces himself to eat again now that his sense of taste has returned, but his appetite vanishes the second he sees Cassian waiting for his reaction. A violent coughing fit suddenly takes over, and Cassian quickly slides the basin into place. Ruel vomits black blood into the basin and ends up even weaker than before. At the worst possible moment, Mineta arrives early, just in time to see Ruel looking half dead. Mineta puts on a perfect show of concern, questioning Cassian about the blood and medicine like an anxious relative. When Cassian leaves with the basin, Mineta sits beside Ruel, clasps his hand, and sweetly talks about the rightful blood of Soteria while greed burns in his eyes. Ruel can practically smell Mineta's desire for power, and the familiar setup makes him suspect this man may even be behind his parents' deaths. As Mineta talks, the recovery power suddenly stirs again, easing Ruel's breathing and proving the power is still alive inside him. That small recovery is enough for Ruel to realize he has not failed after all, because the power can keep him alive long enough to fight back. So instead of breaking character, Ruel thanks Mineta in a hoarse voice, knowing Mineta has completely misunderstood what is happening. Mineta keeps playing the devoted relative, and Ruel dismisses him with enough politeness to end the visit on his own terms. Just before Mineta leaves, Ruel quietly promises he will return to his rightful place, and the line wipes the softness from Mineta's face. Outside the mansion, a rattled Mineta corners Cassian and demands to know what changed in Ruel's room. The exchange turns ugly fast when Mineta asks about the medicine, and Cassian calmly says dying men often cling to false hope. Mineta lets the truth slip by admitting he had extra poison added to worsen Ruel's condition, only for Cassian to remind him that the contract said Cassian was supposed to do the killing. Mineta brushes it off and leaves, but that betrayal snaps Cassian's last trust in him as a client. The moment Mineta is gone, Cassian summons his hidden men and orders them to examine the medicine packet. Already imagining Mineta blamed for poisoning the Lord while Cassian poses as a loyal butler, Cassian decides their contract is finished. Back inside, Cassian nearly drops the wash basin when he finds Ruel standing on his own feet. Ruel knows how impossible it looks, but he asks Cassian to listen before jumping to conclusions. Cassian blurts out a ridiculous guess about the tree granting wishes, and Ruel immediately snaps at him for the nonsense. Once the joke dies, Ruel explains that power was sealed in the tree and that he inherited a recovery ability that made him a little healthier, not cured. Cassian surprises him by accepting the explanation at once, because after seeing Ruel stand, denying it would make less sense. The talk shifts back to danger when Cassian admits he would have warned Ruel sooner if he had known the medicine was poisoned. Ruel says he will not blame him and calmly declares that he is going to settle Satyria's affairs again. Even winded and short of breath, Ruel keeps talking, and Cassian answers with a faint smile because he can see his sick master means every word. Cassian hands over a magic breathing aid called Breath, and Ruel immediately jokes that killing him with it would be a cheap move. Ruel learns Cassian bought it with his own money, a rare hint that this dangerous butler has already crossed the line into protecting him for real. That only makes Ruel push harder, asking Cassian to turn Breath into a necklace, bring meat for dinner, and gather full financial information on Satyria. When Ruel says he wants to start making moves tomorrow, Cassian finally cuts him off and demands he calm down. Ruel insists the recovery power means he can survive some strain, but Cassian fires back that the more urgent the situation is, the slower he has to move. Ruel refuses to stop completely and settles on a compromise. He will at least start reading the data as soon as he wakes up tomorrow. After sending Cassian out, Ruel lies alone and feels the recovery power still moving through him, slowly healing what it can. The next day, the financial documents hit like a disaster report, because Satyria should be rich and thriving, yet almost everything has been wrecked. As he reads, Ruel learns the full scale of the damage: ruined mines, dismantled soldiers, dismissed competent people, and debts spread everywhere. The debt is the worst part, because after Ruel's death those creditors are supposed to carve Satyria apart. One question finally matters most, and when Cassian confirms the debts are in Mineta's name, Ruel's anger turns into a plan. Satisfied that he has the key detail he needed, Ruel abruptly tells Cassian to get the mountain of papers out of his sight. Cassian is baffled that Ruel ignores most of the records, but Ruel says he already found what he came for. Then Ruel changes the subject completely and asks when rehabilitation will start, because he wants his body moving again today. Cassian warns that anger and headaches mean he might be getting sick again, but Ruel taps his chest and points to the recovery power as his answer. Cassian reminds him that recovery does not erase the disease, and when Ruel only tells him not to be mean, Cassian gives in with a bright, dangerous smile and agrees to start. After finally getting real meat, Ruel eats with obvious joy and dryly notes that Mineta must have wasted the family money because he expected Ruel to die soon. When Cassian says the meal is on him, Ruel instantly tells him to spend that money on more meat because eating well is helping him recover. Cassian says seeing Ruel eat this well makes the dish worth making, and Ruel quietly enjoys having such a capable butler on his side. Cassian hands over Breath on a braided string, and Ruel immediately notices the added touch and appreciates how carefully Cassian handled the request. The moment Ruel puts Breath around his neck, his body eases a little, and he admits the pain is still there but far more bearable than before. Before leaving, Cassian quietly promises to bring a proper doctor soon, showing he has already seen through Ruel's act. As soon as the door closes, Ruel drops the act and clutches himself in agony, his whole body shaking with pain like he's being cut apart. Ruel forces himself to endure because he has only 5 days to survive the coming attack, and if his condition does not stabilize within an hour, today's training is lost. To become strong enough to move on his own, Ruel closes his eyes and desperately cycles his recovery power through his ruined body. Exactly 1 hour later, Cassian opens the door and is hit by the smell of blood, instantly fearing the worst. He rushes in to find Ruel grinning weakly with blood running from his mouth, alive but in a terrifying state. Ruel brushes off the bloody scene and tells Cassian to clean it up because he only pushed himself a little, but Cassian immediately senses there is more to it. When Cassian asks who is after him, Ruel shuts the question down and demands rehabilitation training instead, proving he cares more about moving than resting. Cassian accepts that brutal resolve with a crooked smile and gets ready to match it. In the backyard, Ruel forces himself through another lap with a crutch and collapses onto a blanket the moment he reaches the end. Cassian hauls him back up for the second round and says that if Ruel's will is this strong, he will not go easy either. Ruel drags his useless feeling legs forward step by step, cursing his own body as if survival alone is forcing it to move. Cassian keeps provoking him instead of comforting him, and Ruel answers with anger because sheer stubbornness is all he has left. Over the next few days, Ruel keeps training through pain, inching from day 4 to day 2 with miserable but steady progress. By day 2, Ruel finally feels a spark of hope and tells himself he can live if he keeps going. On day 1, Ruel sets his best record with 10 round trips, but he has pushed too hard and collapses into a dangerous fever. Even burning with fever, Ruel insists that the attack is coming tonight and orders Cassian to get ready. After Ruel finally passes out, Cassian watches in silence and realizes this desperate determination will kill him if it continues unchecked. Elsewhere that night, Cassian gets the report he expected. 30 men from the Slug's side are moving toward the mansion. Cassian decides no one will be allowed into the mansion while his master rests, and he joins the kill personally. The old Soteria mansion sits in eerie silence under the night sky, its neglected yard and overgrown trees turning the place into a perfect ambush ground. An intruder slips toward the mansion, but Cassian appears behind him and kills him before he can even raise the alarm. Using his tracking ability in the darkness, Cassian marks the intruders for his men and turns the yard into a clean massacre. Then Cassian realizes some enemies are dropping too fast for this to be his work, which means another fighter is already in the yard. He rushes to the new clash and crashes into a swordsman, their weapons meeting in a burst of sparks. After a sharp exchange, Cassian knocks the swordsman down and pins a dagger to his throat to demand who sent him. The stranger protests that he only attacked because the mansion was under assault, and Cassian starts to suspect he is not one of the assassins at all. A closer look confirms it. The man's awkward accent, battered state, and fine sword point to a foreign knight, not a hired killer. The man introduces himself as Ganian Croft, a knight of the Blue Knights, and proves it with a lion mark token. Once Cassian confirms the token, he identifies himself as Ruel Soteria's servant, and Ganian is immediately struck that a lord is living in such a ruined mansion. Ganian explains he got separated from merchants while drawing off beasts in Masu Forest, and Cassian reluctantly allows the lost knight to stay for a few days. The moment Ganian decides this place smells of injustice, his knightly instinct kicks in and he quietly resolves to help. 2 days later, Ruel wakes from feverish unconsciousness with a blazing headache and drinks water while Cassian supports him. When Cassian says he has been out for 2 days, Ruel realizes the attack was handled, but his relief vanishes as soon as he notices a third person in the room. Ganian politely introduces himself, and Ruel is horrified because the very main character he wanted to avoid is now already inside his mansion. Ruel immediately decides to keep Ganian from getting any more involved and coldly sends him away under the excuse of belated courtesy. But on his way out, Ganian catches the smell of blood from the basin and instantly realizes something is badly wrong. Ganian comes back and bluntly says Ruel's blood smells poisoned, pushing past Cassian's attempt to stop him. Ganian formally reveals he is a Blue Knight with some medical knowledge and asks for permission to examine Ruel. Ruel allows it because throwing out a foreign knight would only create bigger trouble, and if Ganian gets involved, that debt might become useful later. Ganian takes Ruel's wrists and channels a warm healing light, examining him with the medical power he learned from his famous doctor grandfather. What Ganian senses inside Ruel shocks him. The disease is a chaotic mass far beyond anything he has seen, so severe he blurts out how Ruel is even still alive. Ganian admits he cannot cure the illness itself, but he can remove the poison mixed into Ruel's condition, and Ruel accepts that without complaint. Seeing Ganian's heavy expression, Ruel realizes the knight already feels sorry for him, and that emotional debt could be worth far more than medicine. Once Ruel remembers Ganian is here on a secret mission that could affect relations between kingdoms, he stops trying to drive him away and starts thinking about how useful the Blue Knight's name could be. Ruel casually asks whether the backyard was cleaned, steering the conversation toward the attack and giving Ganian a reason to pry further. Ganian seizes the opening and asks why the Soteria family head has been taken away from Ruel, sensing open injustice in this household. Ruel answers that someone else stole it, but he intends to take it back himself because he refuses to run without trying. Those exact words hit Ganian like a personal trigger, because they are the same creed he once shouted during his own night test. Ruel presses further by asking how much weight the Blue Knight's name carries in Laponia, and Ganian answers exactly as hoped: it carries a lot. Later in the backyard, Ganian watches Cassian put Ruel through more rehabilitation and finally objects that this is too much for such an atrophied body. Cassian calmly throws the problem back at him, saying this is Ruel's will, and if Ganian dislikes it, he can try persuading him himself. Ganian steps right into Ruel's path and calls out to stop him, but Ruel is too focused on survival to react at first. When Ruel finally lifts his head, he only tells Ganian to move because finishing the lap matters more than anything else. Ganian steps aside, stunned by how relentless Ruel is, and watches him drag himself to the finish and collapse again. Instead of arguing anymore, Ganian offers a practical solution. He can guide Ruel's body by feeding him a tiny amount of aura. Cassian is surprised, but Ganian says Ruel's vessel is huge even if his body is weak, so a very small infusion should still be safe. The moment Ganian's power enters him, Ruel feels a new fiery force gathering in the exact muscles he needs to use. Following that guidance, Ruel suddenly moves more comfortably than before, and for the first time the sunset feels beautiful instead of distant. But even in that beautiful moment, Ruel refuses to relax, because surviving the slug and everything after that is still the real fight. That night in bed, Cassian reports that he wiped out the attackers and expects things to stay quiet for a while because the enemy likely cannot afford another hit squad soon. Cassian then asks when Ganian's presence should be announced, and Ruel answers that he will reveal it only on the day he can walk into his mansion on his own feet. When Cassian asks if Ganian is useful, Ruel says he is essential to the plan, making it clear the accidental guest is now a strategic piece. Ruel is genuinely pleased when Cassian says he has already verified Ganian's identity, because it proves once again how thorough his butler is. Still thinking about the sunset and the future he wants, Ruel stops Cassian from leaving and sends him to the mansion basement for a red box. Ruel tells him to take it as both a gift and encouragement, secretly deciding to bind Cassian tighter to his side before Ganian can steal his loyalty. In the basement, Cassian actually finds the red box and opens it, only to freeze in shock at the treasure inside. The blade gleams like a star, and Cassian realizes it is a Turbulent Day sword, revealing the family heirloom was actually one half of a hidden twin set. That gift leaves Cassian deeply moved and dangerously tempted, because Ruel has just offered the perfect reward to a man who loves swords almost as much as loyalty. On the way to wake Ruel, Cassian gets stopped by Ganian, who suddenly asks him to join forces with him instead. Cassian refuses so fast it catches Ganian off guard, making it clear his loyalty to Ruel is not open for discussion. Left alone, Ganian starts wondering what makes a powerless-looking Ruel important enough for Cassian to cling to him like this. 5 days later, Ruel finally stands on his own in the mansion backyard at sunset, overwhelmed because he has actually walked. When Ruel turns back, both Cassian and Ganian praise him, and the moment lands as a real breakthrough instead of another training day. Cassian suddenly heads inside with an oddly excited look, leaving Ruel alone with Ganian in the yard. With Cassian gone, Ruel calls Ganian over and asks him directly what he thinks of him. Ganian admits he noticed Ruel's fast recovery, but says bluntly that Ruel still is not interesting enough to explain Cassian's devotion. Ruel asks Ganian to stay and stop judging the kingdom from a distance, because he wants him to watch Soteria rise again with his own eyes. He reminds Ganian that Soteria guards the only route through Masu Forest, so if this territory falls, Laponia itself is exposed. Ganian realizes Ruel has seen straight through why he came, and instead of being offended, he starts liking how brazenly honest Ruel is. Ruel answers just as boldly that he is using Ganian too, then reaches out and shamelessly asks to be treated as a friend. That open ambition wins Ganian over, and he clasps Ruel's hand, accepting him as a friend instead of just a curiosity. Ganian secretly decides to postpone his own business, because watching Ruel shake up Soteria suddenly sounds too fun to miss. The moment the training high fades, Ruel starts coughing again and shamelessly asks his new friend for his warm cape. Ruel pushes his luck further and asks for a friendship gift, prodding Ganian into digging out the walking bracelet from his belongings. Even though the bracelet looks gaudy, Ganian explains it has magic that helps someone walk, which makes it exactly the kind of tool Ruel needs. Ruel puts the bracelet on, and feels a faint magical sensation run through his legs, then thanks Ganian sincerely for once. To pay Ganian back, Ruel offers him something he knows the swordsman will love more than money, a match with Cassian. Cassian comes back carrying a new cane for Ruel, but first he crowds in to inspect the bracelet and grumble about Ganian's gift. Once he hears the bracelet really helps Ruel walk, Cassian drops the complaint and agrees to duel Ganian seriously. Then Cassian reveals his own gift for Ruel, a black cane with silver trim, prepared because he knew Ruel would need it soon. Ruel rises with the new cane and immediately feels the same kind of magical support in it, proof that Cassian prepared it carefully. Before the spar starts, Ganian says he is leaving in 2 days and wants Mineta brought over with proper information, and Cassian answers with vicious enthusiasm. Ruel insists on watching the fight from outside, and Cassian fusses over his condition before marching him all the way to the safest corner of the yard. The instant Cassian turns away from Ruel, all warmth drops off his face, and he draws steel with pure killing intent. Ganian asks if Cassian really means to kill him, and Cassian answers that sparring is basically killing before vanishing from sight. Their blades crash together in a violent first exchange, and the backyard erupts with wind from the sheer force. Cassian immediately turns the exchange into a real killing pattern, slashing for Ganian's neck and making Ganian grin wider instead of retreating. Ganian answers like a hunting beast, pressing forward so hard that one thrust only hits empty air because Cassian has already slipped away. When Cassian reappears, the two monsters crash together again so fast that from Ruel's corner, the fight is already turning into a blur. Ruel realizes they are only using physical strength so far, and that alone already looks insane enough to tear the whole yard apart. The second light starts gathering on their weapons, Ruel panics and throws up his hand before they unleash something that could wreck the mansion. Cassian appears in front of Ruel in a blink to check on him, and that ridiculous speed only drives home what kind of monsters Ruel has tied himself to. 2 days later, Ruel deliberately puts on the same loose, embarrassing outfit from before because he wants Mineta humiliated the second he sees him walking again. Cassian cannot understand why a noble would throw away his dignity on purpose, and Ruel answers that honor is worthless if it cannot keep him alive. That answer only binds Cassian more tightly to him, and he quietly checks Ruel's condition before warning him not to overwork his dangerous body. Outside the mansion, even Ganian is stunned by Ruel's awful outfit and asks if he really plans to go out looking like that. Ruel confirms he dressed like this on purpose, because Mineta is coming for him today and he wants the meeting to sting on sight. They wait at the gate like hosts, and not long after, Mineta's lavish 4-horse carriage arrives with a sloppy, undisciplined escort. Mineta steps out in all his flashy ugliness, then freezes when he sees Ruel standing there in ridiculous clothes with Ganian and Cassian beside him. Mineta tries to ask if Ruel has any other clothes, but Ruel's sudden cold stare makes him instantly regret the remark. Then Ruel starts walking toward the carriage with natural steps, and Mineta turns pale as he realizes his helpless cripple is not helpless anymore. Cassian slips in behind Mineta, mocks his expression, and quietly tells him that everything has already been exposed. Ganian finally introduces himself as a Blue Knights member, and the rattled Mineta nearly forgets basic courtesy in front of a dangerous guest. Once everyone boards the carriage, Ruel needles Mineta with fake concern while enjoying how badly the man is unraveling. As the carriage rolls on, Ruel's coughing fills the cramped space until he finally falls asleep, giving Mineta a chance to turn anxiously toward Ganian. Mineta apologizes for his rudeness, but Ganian coolly says he does not care and instead starts asking why Satyria's lord lives in rags while Mineta lives in luxury. Caught off guard, Mineta stammers and asks to discuss it privately away from Cassian, which only proves Ganian has him cornered. Later, when they stop for the night, Mineta is already miserable before Ruel comes out of the carriage instead of resting and makes everything worse. Mineta tells Ruel to go rest inside, but Ruel cheerfully refuses and needles him by acting far better than Mineta wants him to be. Then Ruel drops the act and openly tells Mineta the medicine he gave him was poisoned, and that he already has proof. Ruel keeps pressing, mocking Mineta's dogs and calling out the wealth of Satyria that Mineta has been chewing through as if it were his own. That finally snaps Mineta, who erupts and orders the knights around the camp to kill Ruel on the spot. The knights draw and rush in, but Ruel does not flinch at all, because Mineta has just walked straight into his trap. Ruel quietly calls Cassian's name, and Cassian rises out of his shadow so suddenly that Mineta and the charging knights are caught flat-footed. Smiling at the horrified Mineta, Ruel finally gives the order he has been saving: kill everyone except that slug. At Ruel's command, Cassian moves without hesitation and turns Mineta's escort into a massacre. Mineta finally screams when Cassian's blade reaches his own throat, but Ganian doesn't step in because nobody here can stop the assassin anyway. When the last knight drops, Ruel finally relaxes enough to feel his own pain and forces himself forward on his cane. Ruel walks straight up to the broken Mineta, calls him a slug, and makes it clear he knows Mineta is only a puppet for someone else. Ruel tests names until Mineta finally blurts out the real pair behind the plot against him: Carbina Satyria and Jane Satyria. When Mineta starts screaming again, Ruel snaps from the pain in his head and orders silence. Ganian solves it in his own blunt way by pinning Mineta's thigh with a sword and covering his mouth until the fool nods obediently. Ruel calmly offers Mineta a way to live, but only if he swears by mana to obey every order. Mineta accepts instantly, kneeling like a beaten dog as the mana contract binds him to Ruel. Ruel quietly thanks Ganian for stepping in, but he is too drained to keep talking now that his first goal is finally secured. Cassian warns that stacking mana contracts is dangerous, but Ruel is too wrecked to care and leaves Mineta in his hands for now. Trusting Cassian to handle the rest, Ruel collapses into the carriage and lets the night end there. By the next meal stop, Cassian reports that Mineta revealed little, but he will hand over evidence at home, and today's timing is perfect because the family meeting is already underway. Ruel cuts off any talk about his parents before Cassian can continue, because hearing about strangers as family still sits wrong with him. Cassian takes that silence as grief and casually punches Mineta in the stomach so hard he vomits his food on the spot. Ganian brightens the mood by reminding Ruel to use the Blue Knight's name if needed, and Ruel quietly appreciates just how useful that backing will be. Ruel even thinks, a little regretfully, that if Ganian were easier to bind, clinging to the hero would have been the safest plan of all. When the carriage reaches Satyria's lands, Ruel leans out the window and sees the vast white fortress that should have been his all along. The scale of the place hits him hard, and for a moment he can feel why Satyria stands as Laponia's gatekeeper. Before they arrive, Ruel gives Mineta simple orders: act normal, show Cassian the hidden evidence, and become his spy inside Satyria. Mineta agrees to report every secret conversation and situation to Cassian, too scared to even question what happened to him that night. The carriage rolls through the castle grounds, and Ruel finally reaches the Satyria home he was exiled from. His excitement dies the second he notices the main mansion is being guarded by low-grade strangers instead of proper household knights. One look at the unmanaged garden tells Ruel the household has been hollowed out, and Mineta can only admit there is supposedly no money left. Ruel presses harder, eyeing Mineta's expensive clothes and making it obvious he does not believe this ruin happened without greed. Before Mineta can answer, Carbina and Jane rush out to greet Ruel, and both of the women look far more frightened and worn down than he expected. Their shaky faces do not fit the confrontation Ruel expected, which only makes the coming family meeting feel even more suspicious. Instead of easing in, Ruel orders them to take him straight to the conference room so everyone can learn the Lord of Soteria is back. Outside the conference room, Ruel hears the barons already fighting over taxes and protection money before he even steps inside. Ruel orders the door opened, and the arguing room falls into instant silence as everyone stares at the sickly young man they no longer recognize. One baron shouts at the intrusion, still thinking Ruel is just some spoiled child from 5 years ago. Ruel slams his cane down and demands to know why none of them are bowing to their lord. Cassian proudly names him as Lord Ruel Soteria, forcing the room to remember the heir they wrote off years ago. When most of them still hesitate, Ruel reminds them that barons only hold power because the family allows it, and he can strip those seats away at will. Then Ruel drops the hammer and dismisses every baron in the room on the spot. A beat later he spares the only man who bowed immediately, and that lone survivor introduces himself as Minute Hen. The dismissed barons instantly switch from pride to groveling fear, begging forgiveness once they understand their positions are truly gone. Ruel, already exhausted, has Cassian call the knights to drag them out, and warns them not to make another sound. Carbina finally speaks up in desperation, trying to claim even a lord cannot act like this without law behind him. Ruel shuts her down with the law itself, pointing out that the head of the family alone decides who becomes or stops being a baron. He pushes harder and asks if she wants to be lord herself, turning her protest into something that sounds dangerously close to treason. Once Ruel reminds everyone that insulting a direct-line noble can justify immediate execution, Carbina drops to her knees at once. Ruel spares her for now because he wants the whole root exposed, not just a noisy branch cut off too early. Carbina grabs Jane and flees the room, while Ruel has to steady himself with breath because the strain of speaking this much is tearing at his body. Ruel dismisses the remaining ex-barons too, and they rush out bowing over and over, grateful just to keep their heads. With the room finally quiet, Ruel keeps Ganian inside and turns his attention to the one baron who reacted correctly from the start. Ruel asks Minute for an honest answer about the state of Soteria, even though the poor man is clearly terrified of saying the wrong thing. After wrestling with himself, Minute blurts out the plain truth: Soteria is a mess. Instead of punishing him, Ruel laughs with genuine approval because that honesty is exactly what he needed to hear. Ruel asks Minute to help him restore Soteria, and the loyal baron accepts with his whole heart. Later in the former lord's office, Ruel skips the grand chair, collapses onto the reception sofa, and orders a full report before his body gives out. Cassian tells him to rest, but Ruel refuses because there is too much to untangle and no time to waste. Ganian reports first and reveals the ugliest surprise yet: Carbina and Jane are involved with drugs. Ganian names the drug as Prazio, a costly substance that feels pleasant and hooks people a little more subtly than ordinary narcotics. Then Cassian produces the hard evidence, dropping a stack of documents that ties the drug trail to the household's collapse. Ruel digs into the paperwork so completely that an hour disappears without him noticing. By the time he looks up, Cassian has quietly wrapped him in a blanket and set out a warm meat pie because he knows Ruel will forget his own limits. Ganian has already gone off to inspect the mansion's knights, and both Ruel and Cassian think that errand will only confirm how bad things are. Cassian also reminds Ruel that he has food allergies now, which makes his growing list of things to survive even more annoying. Buried in the papers, Ruel finds a flame-marked trail showing that a secret group taught Carbina how to kill his parents, drive him out, and sink Soteria into debt through addiction. The empty treasury finally makes sense to him too, because the missing money was burned away on drugs. Cassian passes along one more clue from Ganian: Prazio comes from a creature in the deep sea, far from this landlocked border territory. That distance leaves Ruel with a bad feeling, because it means someone bigger may be reaching into Soteria from far beyond ordinary local debtors. Even so, Ruel keeps moving and tells Cassian to bring Minetta in, because the fool still has answers he needs tonight. When Minetta is ushered into the room, he blurts out that Carbina and Jane are panicking, but Ruel cuts past the noise and demands the truth about the drugs, the debts, and the group behind them. Minetta finally starts talking, admitting Carbina introduced him to Jane and hinting that the trouble began years before Ruel's parents died. He reveals an unknown group sank its claws into Carbina 8 years ago, then secretly propped up Soteria for the last 3 years while tightening control over the whole house. When Minetta says the group fed Carbina and Jane drugs, Ruel cuts straight to the name and shocks him by identifying it as Prazio. Minetta admits the drugs were free at first, then the price exploded, and his desperate answer was raising taxes, draining his estate, and borrowing even more money from people the same group chose for him. Ruel sums it up coldly: cornered by debt and addicts in the house, Minetta sold off anything he could, and the evidence in the recovered documents is enough to overturn everything. The moment Ruel stands up in a good mood, his body betrays him with a violent rush of dizziness and blood. Cassian sends Minetta outside at once and, absurdly calm in the middle of the crisis, still protects the meat pie before dealing with Ruel. Ruel vomits bright red blood instead of the usual black, and this time the sight is so vivid it unsettles even him. The delayed recovery finally starts moving, but only after Ruel is drained enough to collapse unconscious into Cassian's arms. Ganian barges in without knocking, but one look at unconscious Ruel in Cassian's arms is enough for Cassian to snap at him and send him after Minetta instead. Ruel wakes before dawn choking on more blood, and Cassian is already there to make him spit it out. This time the blood is black again, and once it is out, Ruel immediately feels better enough to ask one thing first: the pie. Cassian promises to bake the pie again, then studies the black blood seriously while Ruel guesses his body may be spitting out impurities as it recovers. After months of thinking about it, Cassian bluntly proposes a custom magic handkerchief just for cleaning up Ruel's blood and vomit in public. Behind the joke, Cassian lands the real point: Ruel's illness is nowhere near fine, and at the wrong moment it could still drag him down instantly. A firm sound outside pulls Ruel to the window, where he spots Ganian already up at dawn and instantly starts plotting again. Even after a night this bad, Ruel orders Cassian to have Mineta gather every night for training until he wakes, because he no longer trusts what is guarding Soteria. When Ruel watches the assembled knights run, his disgust deepens because they look less like household guards and more like unfit drifters. Ganian confirms only a handful have any real skill, and Mineta has to admit most of these men are debt-linked replacements, and rushed and adventurer leftovers filling the gaps. Ruel asks what became of the original knights, and Mineta admits some were forced out while others left on their own. Ruel cuts off the inspection and heads for food instead, but on the way he quietly tells Ganian and Cassian they can handle the debt-bound trash however they want because those men are not his people. At breakfast, the half-trained servants and Hollow Mansion routine tell Ruel the rot goes far beyond the guards. When Mineta explains the old staff were partly dismissed and partly gone, Ruel realizes he has seen enough and stops pretending this can be cleaned up gently. Ruel apologizes to Ganian for borrowing more of his strength, then gives the order that changes the whole mansion: gather everyone to the training ground. A servant tries to slip out of the room, and Cassian drops the would-be rat in one clean move before Ruel silences the panic. As he leads them out, Ruel decides he has to rip out every planted enemy now, before news of his return spreads to the people who hollowed out Soteria. On the training ground, Ruel sees fewer than 100 people gathered to feed on Soteria, and the sight wounds his pride more than their fear does. He makes Mineta identify the people he personally brought in, separating the chosen parasites from the rest. Once the chosen people are marked out and Carbina and Jane are moved aside, Ruel gives the merciless order that starts his purge: kill them. Ganian's sword bursts with light and Cassian vanishes into motion, while Carbina still sits back comfortably because she thinks two men cannot possibly beat the crowd. That confidence shatters fast as Ganian and Cassian carve through the crowd like monsters, turning the training ground into a storm of blood and flying bodies. Carbina vomits at the carnage, and Ruel makes her look at it, telling her this blood-soaked ruin is exactly what she created. Ruel tells her the truth she has run from: she sold out Soteria, and he is here to take it back. Carbina screams that Soteria is hers, but Ruel points at the butchered defenders around her and asks what part of this looks like possession. Her rant collapses into drug-soaked obsession with direct bloodlines and the main branch, and Ruel realizes there is almost nothing left of the woman he could have reasoned with. Seeing Carbina fall apart, Jane spits contempt at Mineta and lunges at Ruel with a dagger hidden under her skirt. Before Jane can touch him, Cassian appears in front of Ruel and sends her flying with one savage kick. With the last resistance gone, Ganian sheathes his sword and complains the whole massacre was so one-sided it barely counted as a fight. Ruel turns from the bloodshed to the survivors and asks what they think now, and the entire crowd instantly breaks into desperate pleas for mercy. One word from Ruel shuts them all up, proving the weakest-looking person on the field is the one no one dares resist. Ruel offers anyone who feels wronged a chance to step forward, and only one woman dares to do it, a cook still wearing flour and sauce on her apron. Estelle says she was only hired to make a meat pie because Cassian's was better than hers, and she wanted the Lord himself to judge her cooking in the morning. Ruel likes the answer, asks her name, and spares her on the spot, telling her to come stand with him. No one else comes forward, so once Estelle is clear, Ruel gives the second and final order to finish the rest. 3 days later, Ruel is finally awake from the fever that dropped him after the purge, and Cassian reports the cleanup with cold efficiency. The bodies are gone, Carbina and Jane are under strict guard, and Mineta is dead by suicide, leaving behind a will that confesses their crimes. Reading the will, Ruel finds the key line he wanted most: outsiders ordered them to open the door of Soteria, turning the whole plot into treason against crown and kingdom. Even with the fever still burning, Ruel laughs because this confession is exactly the weapon he needs. Ruel orders copies of the will sent to the debt-linked nobles under Ganian's backing, then strips Carbina and Jane of the Soteria name so any debt under them is cut loose from the family. After Cassian leaves, Ganian drops in and promises to shield Ruel until Soteria is rebuilt, as long as Ruel stays on the right path. Ganian tells him plainly that his actions look like those of a true lord, and that as a knight devoted to justice, he does not think Ruel's bloody choice was wrong. Once Ganian leaves, the weight of the deaths finally catches up to Ruel, and he cries alone behind the closed door. Outside, Cassian thanks Ganian for saying what Ruel needed to hear, and Ganian answers that he only spoke honestly. Ganian warns that people like Ruel will burn themselves up protecting what they care about, then bluntly says Ruel's life looks like it has only about a year left. Ganian admits he cares because a man wants to protect Soteria with his whole life, but Cassian keeps quiet about Ruel's hidden recovery power. Cassian comes back almost immediately, catches Ruel wiping away the evidence of tears, and sits down as if nothing happened. Ruel immediately tries to move on to the next job, but when he brings up having Minute track down the mansion's missing original staff, Cassian unexpectedly refuses because what he wants most now is for Ruel to recover. When Ruel tries to keep talking, Cassian abruptly shuts him down for the night with a strained, almost pained refusal. Then Cassian pulls out a black spray device and knocks Ruel out on purpose, pushing himself through the guilt because he thinks it has to be done. 2 days later, Ruel wakes up hungry instead of feverish and immediately starts eating meat pie in bed, proving the forced rest worked. Ruel spitefully drops crumbs onto the blanket just to annoy him, but Cassian answers with deadpan calm that he was going to wash or throw it out anyway. Cassian hands over 8 letters from the indebted barons, and Ruel reads through them until a satisfied smile appears at the last one. The letters confirm the debt was Carbina and Jane's choice, not Satyria's, so Ruel now has proof the family never needed to crawl into treason. As soon as he finishes eating, Ruel decides he is done lying still and orders an inspection of the territory's most remote areas. Cassian tries to excuse Ruel's absence, but Ruel rejects that and says a lord who vanished for 5 years has to protect the land and earn its trust back himself. Even after several slices, Ruel is still starving, and they wonder if his strange power is part of why his appetite keeps surging. Ruel orders breakfast for 2 and says Ganian is coming with him, stacking more work onto Cassian without hesitation. When Cassian suggests adding another butler, Ruel instantly agrees and says he can recruit one whenever he finds someone as strong as Cassian, which lands like a personal attack. After Cassian leaves, Ruel puts the pie aside and quietly reminds himself that Satyria is 5 years behind and he has no time to waste. Remembering the unfinished novel's unstable kingdoms and the lurking unknown group, Ruel decides survival means preparing early for whatever bigger conflict is coming. Soon after, Estelle sees them off with a basket of fresh baked food, and Cassian confirms the house staff already followed his preparations. Inside the carriage, Ganian casually points out that the new servants and guards smell like Cassian's people, while Ruel hides his amusement behind a cookie. Cassian tries to dodge the question with a shameless excuse about shampoo, and Ruel immediately knows he is lying badly. As the carriage rolls toward Sissel, Cassian explains it is the outermost village near Masu's forest, where adventurers gather and wild beasts sometimes cross the wall. Ruel half expects a fantasy road incident, and is almost disappointed when nothing happens on the trip. Then he catches himself and realizes even thieves would matter here, because any kind of crime reveals how his territory has been left to rot. To avoid drawing attention, the carriage stops outside Sissel, and Ruel gets down with Cassian's help for a quieter inspection. Ruel even makes a point of politely greeting the driver, because anyone brought in by Cassian is now part of the people he needs on his side. At Sissel's gate, Ruel is quietly pleased to see the guards here look far more competent than the men currently posted at his own mansion. Just beyond the village, Ruel spots a colossal fog-wrapped rock carved with unknown script and realizes it is even more overwhelming up close. Ganian says he once got close to that rock and felt like it would swallow him whole, so he bluntly warns Ruel not to go near it out of curiosity. Once they pass inside, Sissel opens into a lively frontier town packed with merchants, soldiers, and adventurers under rows of red roofs. Then a small boy tugs at Ruel's clothes and, with complete sincerity, asks if he is in a lot of pain. The boy offers ackle herbs from Masu's forest, and what really alarms Ruel is hearing that a child is casually going into that dangerous place. After Ganian quietly confirms the herb really can ease pain, Ruel buys the basket and gently questions the boy about his grandfather. The moment the first child vanishes into the crowd, more children appear with the same ackle baskets, and Ruel realizes he has just been expertly played. Even so, Ruel decides to buy every basket anyway because those kids might be working just to earn a place to sleep. When one child eagerly offers to introduce him to their doctor grandfather, Ruel starts coughing hard enough that all the children panic on the spot. With 2 monsters guarding him and a lead he cannot ignore, Ruel agrees to follow the children to this mysterious grandfather. As they cross Sissel, the children chatter about a huge warehouse robbery that once fed half the town with stolen grain. What catches Ruel's attention is that adventurers are still hunting the thief under the dead barons' names, which means fear of Satyria still has not reached far enough. So Ruel quietly orders Cassian to find out why that request is still active, even while they keep moving. Cassian passes all the herb baskets to Ganian with one smooth move and promises he can track Ruel anywhere before slipping away. The children eventually stop in front of an enormous warehouse ringed with soldiers and adventurers, and Ruel's bad feeling gets stronger immediately. Ganian studies the scene and says the thief is no ordinary criminal but a genuinely capable fighter, somewhere below him and around Cassian's level. Hearing that Cassian might be a 5 or 6 on Ganian's scale leaves Ruel stunned and secretly thrilled at what a lucky hire he made. As they walk on, Ruel realizes a skilled thief acting here right after the Baron's abuses could ignite open rebellion if he does not move first. To lighten the walk, Ruel asks about aura colors and the Satyria heirloom, and Ganian lights up at the thought of seeing the famous sword. That only makes Ruel think harder about making a replica later, because the heirloom may be too famous to hand off carelessly. The children finally bring them to a rough forest-side settlement outside Sissel and run toward a white-haired man they call grandfather. Chainall greets the strangers warily, but before introductions finish, Ruel stumbles from exhaustion and Ganian catches him against his back. The children loudly explain that this sick, noble-looking man bought all their herbs, and Chainall's suspicion softens into apology and concern. Then Ganian quietly confirms what he already suspected. This so-called grandfather is the one they have been looking for. Ruel later wakes inside Chainall's rough house to find Cassian already back, amused that Ruel collapsed before reaching the end of the visit. When Ruel asks what he found, Cassian warns him to lower his voice because this settlement is packed with people who can hear too much. A knock interrupts them, and Chainall comes in still hoping to help, only to admit he cannot treat Ruel's illness after all. Ruel takes the opening, introduces himself, and gently asks why a whole village exists hidden out here in the forest instead of inside Sissel. To keep suspicion down, Cassian smoothly claims Ruel is just his sick younger brother on his first outing in years, and Ruel has to swallow the insult for now. Chainall finally explains that 4 years ago the barons drove out anyone who could not pay taxes, and this hidden settlement grew from the people he took in. Ruel pushes harder and says the head of Soteria should have stopped that abuse, but Chainall snaps back that a lord without power is only a scarecrow. Chainall leaves after that bitter answer, and Ruel is left wondering who his resentment is really aimed at. Once they are alone again, Cassian reveals the bounty was quietly reissued under an adventurer client after the barons died, supposedly to restore trust over the delayed request. But when Cassian adds that the thief supposedly kept insulting adventurers, Ruel immediately calls that story nonsense. Ruel points out that if Chainall hates the barons, provoking adventurers would only create needless enemies, so someone else is clearly steering this mess. He decides they will deal with both the thief and the people manipulating the hunt, then tells Cassian to bring Ganian in. Before Ganian arrives, Cassian mentions the settlement is full of fighters and informers, which jolts a half-forgotten future plotline back into Ruel's mind. Ruel suddenly connects Chainall's hidden settlement, their hatred of the barons, and the armed people here to the future knights of Soteria who were supposed to gather around Ganian later. By the time Ganian walks in, sweaty and happy from sparring, Ruel is already grinning like a man who just found buried treasure. Ruel starts baiting him on purpose, telling him to make a mess in the name of the Blue Knights and asking whether he wants a proper reason to fight. Then Ruel lays out his real deduction. The commission brokers are the ones profiting from the repeated bounty, because they keep taking a huge cut no matter who the client is. The moment Ganian understands greedy middlemen have twisted the whole hunt for profit, his smile turns dangerous and Ruel decides to use this chance to beat the bad habits out of them. Ruel sends Ganian off with a blunt order to cause chaos around the thief case, promising he will handle the fallout himself. As soon as Ganian leaves, Ruel asks for Estelle's cookie basket, only to learn Ganian already took every last bit of it. Ruel is left sulking over the lost cookies and quietly wonders why Estelle's food feels so strangely good for his body. Later, in the exile settlement's outdoor meal area, Cassian carefully strips risky food off Ruel's plate, while nearby children stare and ask if Ruel is sick again. Ruel is left with a miserable plate of potatoes and sweet potatoes, and even he can tell Cassian is not tormenting him on purpose. Chainall notices Ruel's strange meal, then realizes Cassian quietly trimmed his own portion too and is taken aback by that blunt little act of care. When Ruel reaches for water, Cassian smoothly stops him with a deadpan excuse about his own long gray hair, and Chainall bursts out laughing at how oddly familiar they look together. Once the meal settles, Ruel calmly brings up the giant warehouse robbery and watches Chainall for any crack in his reaction. Chainall admits the stolen grain fed hungry people, and for a moment his regret shows through the calm. Ruel presses harder and says that feeding people with stolen grain is still a sin, even if the laughter it buys feels precious. Chainall finally breaks and asks who will make these children laugh if he stops, showing just how far despair pushed him off the path of a knight. Ruel raises his voice so everyone can hear and orders Chainall to stop, saying no one asked him to carry all of this alone just to force a few smiles. Chainall says it is already too late and rises, while the watching villagers begin to stand and close in with drawn steel. Even as swords come out around them, Cassian just keeps eating, a quiet sign that he still thinks this can be handled. Ruel demands to know what they traded away for chivalry, and Chainall answers with grim loyalty that abandoned or not, they are still Soteria. That answer hits Ruel hard enough to make him laugh, cough, and nearly fold as another brutal wave of sickness tears through him. Before anyone can act, Ruel forces himself upright on his cane and gets ready to prove exactly who he is. Ruel releases mana from the back of his hand, and the sky-blue shield crest of Soteria's direct line flares into the dark clearing. The whole settlement recognizes the crest at once, swords hit the ground, and Chainall drops to his knees in shaken devotion. Ruel tells the kneeling exiles they no longer need to struggle like this, and orders his lost knights to come back to him. The order barely leaves his mouth before black blood spills through Ruel's fingers and his body starts to give out. Cassian catches the collapsing lord and coolly tells the stunned exiles to prepare to meet him again as knights, not thieves. After Cassian carries Ruel away, Chainall breaks into tears and realizes his lord came back for the people everyone else had already forgotten. Chainall swears he will return, and the others answer one after another until the whole settlement echoes with the same vow. At the Rect Request Center, Ganian corners the commission chief in an office he has already smashed apart, making it clear the gentle approach is over. The chief still refuses to talk, hiding behind threats that soldiers will come while Ganian presses him with lethal calm. Then Cassian arrives carrying Ruel, and Ganian jolts in alarm until Ruel admits he only played up the collapse to end the settlement scene cleanly. Ruel takes in the sliced open office, the crowd outside, and the chief still yelling, and decides this mess needs one more push. Ruel asks whether the soldiers ever came, and when Ganian says no, he realizes the rot goes beyond the request center. To break the chief's nerve, Ruel has Cassian screen them with a cloak and quietly shows the direct line crest up close. The chief caves instantly, and Ruel orders him to keep shouting his crimes until the soldiers finally show up. In front of the crowd, the chief finally blurts out that he used the warehouse bandit case to swindle adventurers and steal the commission fees. With the confession secured, Ruel decides not to head home yet because the missing soldiers are now the next corruption to tear out. Ruel cheerfully asks Ganian to go on another rampage, and Ganian agrees at once now that he is starting to enjoy this kind of work. At the Sissel barracks, Ruel's group finds the place far too quiet for a night crisis, with only 2 soldiers posted outside. When Ruel asks why no one answered the request center, chaos, laughter and the stink of alcohol leaking from the barracks expose the rot at once. Ruel drops the mask and orders the guard to announce that the Lord has arrived, instantly turning the man from rude to terrified. The instant the guard runs inside, Ruel turns to Ganian and orders him to seize everyone in the barracks, women included, and knock out anyone who resists. Ganian storms the barracks, and the screams and crashing from inside tell Ruel exactly how filthy the place really was. A few minutes later, Ruel enters a barracks room where beaten soldiers and illicit guests have all been forced to kneel. When Ruel asks for the captain, every bruised face in the room turns toward the same trapped man. Their doubt vanishes the second Ruel shows the direct line crest again, and the whole room turns from skepticism to terror. Ruel lays down brutal new rules on the spot: no drinking on duty, no women in the barracks, fast dispatch, district patrols, and no violence against villagers. He makes it clear the whole barracks will share the blame if anyone slips again, then walks out before hearing a single excuse. Outside in the night wind, Cassian drapes his own cloak over Ruel, but Ruel is already thinking about the guest waiting back at the mansion. Ganian asks if Ruel plans to keep doing this kind of cleanup everywhere, and Ruel answers with a grin that makes the whole mess sound fun. Ruel tempts Ganian to stay in Soteria and keep cleaning up its chaos, even joking that he can put him in charge of making the mess. Ganian finally agrees, deciding that at least he will not be bored if he stays with Ruel a while longer. On the carriage ride back, Cassian treats the blisters Ruel earned from walking too much, a quiet reminder that his body still is not ready for this pace. Ganian awkwardly tells Ruel he is amazing because his body is weak, but his spirit still moves like a knight's. Ruel accepts the clumsy praise as a real compliment, but Ganian follows it with a sincere request for him to move more moderately. Cassian backs Ganian up, and Ruel starts to feel cornered by the 2 people who know he is pushing his luck the hardest. When Cassian asks who Ruel plans to rely on later, Ruel answers at once that he already has someone in mind. The carriage suddenly stops, and only Ruel jolts, instantly perking up at the thought of some classic roadside trouble. Instead of thieves, a young woman outside introduces herself as Driana, a disciple of Soteria's magic knights, and asks whether the Lord is in this carriage. Ruel leans out to face her himself, but when Driana asks to see the crest, he refuses because he has already pushed this body too far tonight. Driana hesitates instead of getting to the point, and Ruel, too exhausted and irritated for this, orders the carriage to move on. Back on the road, Ganian points out that nobody casually uses a wizard's name, but Ruel still refuses to chase it while his head is pounding. The next morning, Ruel wakes under cloudy light and finds the blisters on his feet already gone thanks to his recovery power. For one peaceful second, Ruel pictures a normal future, and then a knock at the door breaks it. Estelle enters and explains that Cassian hurried off because a guest came looking for Ruel. When Ruel asks who the guest is, Estelle says she is a female disciple of Soteria's magic knights, and Ruel instantly realizes Driana followed him to the mansion. Back at the mansion, Estelle shyly offers the pie she saved because the butler guessed Ruel would ask for it as soon as he woke up. Ruel digs in immediately, and the rich crunchy pie hits him like medicine now that his recovery is finally turning around. After praising the taste, Ruel abruptly asks Estelle if she has some kind of special power. Estelle panics and bows so hard she nearly folds in half, terrified he is accusing her of putting something strange in his food. Ruel calms her down and explains the opposite is happening. Every time he eats her cooking, he feels healthier. When Estelle admits other people have said similar things, Ruel quietly locks onto the possibility that her cooking really does have a healing effect. Satisfied for now, Ruel tells Estelle to prepare simple clothes and bake more snacks because he plans to head out again today. Once Estelle leaves, Ruel smiles to himself, relieved she was never mentioned in the original story because that means he may have saved someone who was supposed to vanish. Later, Ruel comes out tapping his cane, bundled in 3 layers, and Cassian immediately dryly comments on how lightly dressed he looks while Driana waits nearby. Driana apologizes for last night, and asks to speak privately in the carriage, making it clear she came with urgent business. Cassian warns him that his opponent is a wizard, but Ruel grins and goes anyway. Inside the carriage, Diana gets straight to it and asks if Soteria will accept them again. Ruel tests her by guessing that they left Soteria on their own, and Diana's shocked agreement confirms he has seen through a secret even Carbina's records never explained. She explains they did not abandon Soteria lightly, and even tried to reach Ruel half a year ago, but they were blocked before they could meet him. Ruel instantly realizes Mineta must have been intercepting anyone who tried to approach him, and quietly files that betrayal away. Diana explains they had to stay hidden because everyone expected Ruel to die, and now that she no longer has to hide the truth from a dying lord, she came in person. When Ruel asks who cut them off from him, Diana answers with open fury that Carbina severed everything he had. She reveals the hidden group is the Magic Knights, a force created solely for Ruel and the last piece of Soteria's legacy that survived. She adds that the Magic Knights were supposed to appear 5 years ago, but Carbina ruined that plan before it could happen. Then Diana says something even stranger. Even if he cannot remember it now, Ruel once saved them all from an evil monster. Ruel decides the wizards are too useful to reject, especially if they can help escort him and explain Estelle's strange gift. So he agrees to meet Diana's master and hear the rest directly. Ruel also makes one thing clear: Mineta cast them out, not him, because he was too sick to even leave his bed. That apology breaks Diana completely, and she starts crying because the lord she thought was doomed is still trying to take responsibility. Ruel bluntly repeats that he is not going to die and orders her to wait at the mansion with the Magic Knights after she pulls herself together. He escapes the emotional scene as fast as he can, grumbling about the wide carriage step while climbing down. Outside, Cassian hears the crying and instantly teases that Ruel must have tricked her somehow. After that, Ruel rides back to Sissel in a carriage marked with Soteria's shield, openly announcing the Lord's return. The trip into the forest to greet his knights turns into a spectacle, with curious townspeople trailing the carriage all the way out. Inside, Gainian jokes that people probably just want to stare at a ruined beggar lord, but even he notices the crowd feels more sympathetic than hostile. Ruel keeps feeding everyone Estelle's cookies and tests them again, but only he seems to feel that strange restorative kick. By the time they arrive, Cassian is already suffering because Ruel has managed to get crumbs all over himself again. The moment Ruel steps down, the forest settlement erupts as Chainall and the waiting fighters thunder Soteria's name in perfect formation. Ruel raises one hand and the whole forest falls silent, proving these men already accept his authority. Then he gives the order they have waited years to hear. His knights are going home to reclaim what belongs to Soteria. Before leaving, Ruel asks about the children left behind, and Chainall admits not everyone has joined them yet. Ruel leaves the door open anyway, telling Chainall to send word whenever the rest are ready to return. The return trip swells into a full procession, with about 100 hardened knights following Ruel's carriage back towards Sissel. People in Sissel start shouting that the knights are back, and the rumor spreads faster than anyone can control it. Some citizens assume Soteria got so poor it had to sell the knights proper armor, but the knights' hard eyes make it clear they have not returned in shame. The crowd's mood keeps rising anyway, and people start saying out loud that the Baron's long luxury might finally be ending. Ruel cannot make sense of the cheers, because he still expects stones for being a failed lord, not applause. Gainian rubs it in and tells him he was wrong. The people never hated him the way he assumed. By the time the parade reaches the mansion, the praise feels less exciting and more like a burden Ruel now has to answer with results. He steadies himself with more cookies and repeats his real goal under his breath: a peaceful normal life, no matter how loud the crowd gets. Still annoyed by the carriage step, Ruel casually orders a tighter footrest built before heading inside with Gainian. Left behind with the order, Cassian fumes at Ruel but still snaps at the guild guards to build the new step exactly as asked. Soon after, Ruel pours hidden gold onto a desk and shows Cassian the real prize inside Soteria's secret safe, the heirloom sword Turbulent Day. Cassian is so overwhelmed by the famous sword that he puts on gloves before daring to touch it. Ruel confirms the sword is Cassian's reward under their contract, and the butler can barely believe he is really being given Turbulent Day. But the deal comes with a condition first. Ruel wants a perfect replica made so the real sword can stay hidden. Cassian erupts at the word duplicate, but Ruel coolly reminds him that a famous heirloom is useless if someone recognizes it and takes it back. Ruel adds a second order and tells Cassian to use the hidden money to buy proper armor for the returning knights. When Cassian asks where the money came from, Ruel casually reveals only he can see and open a hidden safe room in the mansion. The safe held more than coins, including jewels and ominously wrapped items covered in paper seals, and even Ruel decided not to touch those yet. Cassian carefully wraps Turbulent Day and stores it in his magical pocket vault, finally proving why he guards his belongings like treasure. Before leaving, Cassian hands over fresh debt letters from the Lumina and Shio families, showing the pressure on Soteria is already closing in again. Ruel asks for Minutes report next, expecting names he can use, and Cassian passes over a much longer list than he wanted to see. The list is packed with former nobles, butlers, and servants who were driven out or left, so Ruel tells Cassian to pick one target they can quietly handle first. He then says he will meet the magic knights after lunch and quietly move on the depressing nobles right after that, because now that he can walk, he wants everything moving at once. Cassian guesses he means to attack every problem in one rush and can only sigh when Ruel confirms he basically does. They settle on the closer Lumina family first, and Ruel insists on moving quietly instead of making another public spectacle. Ruel also orders more of Estelle's cookies for the road and asks Cassian to send Chainall in next. Once Cassian leaves, Ruel's body crashes again, and he closes his eyes to force his recovery while cursing how weak he still is. Chainall enters after hearing Ruel found the hidden cache, but one look at his lord's terrible color tells him the illness is still serious. Instead of discussing his health, Ruel promises proper armor within days and says he refuses to let his knights remain a symbol of Satyria's poverty. That respect hits Chainall hard, because after years of exile, his lord is treating him like the face of Satyria again. Ruel's first order is simple but heavy. He will be gone for at least a week, so Chainall must hold Satyria safely in his absence. Chainall agrees at once, but the sight of Ruel's blue lips and trembling hands makes the promise feel like he is being asked to protect a lord already burning his life away. Ruel presses the question again until Chainall can do nothing but shout that yes, he will keep Satyria safe. Only after hearing that answer does Ruel smile, then he adds one last order and asks whether years of neglect have rusted Chainall's sword. Between coughs, Ruel tells him to be strong, and Chainall receives the words like a command for Satyria itself. Chainall drops to one knee and swears he will be strong, sealing his pledge to guard Satyria while his lord goes back into danger. As the carriage rounds the corner, Ruel doubles over in a hard coughing fit, and has to brace himself on his cane before anyone sees weakness. Ruel snaps that he is not throwing up, straightens himself by force, and climbs into the carriage before the worried looks can linger on him. Inside the moving carriage behind Dryaana's wagon, Ganian bluntly warns him not to overdo it, but Ruel shrugs it off because other people can do the work too. To keep going, Ruel reaches for the snack basket, and Cassian hands over Estelle's cookies along with the apples the children sent. Ruel bites into a cookie and quietly enjoys the taste, using that tiny comfort to push through the ride. By the time Dryaana's wagon reaches the border village between Satyria and Lumina, Ruel has passed out from sheer exhaustion and Cassian has to wake him. Ruel wakes feverish and hoarse, but he still insists it is the usual kind of fever he gets when he overdoes himself. Dryaana opens the carriage door with a bright welcome, only to realize Ruel is in no shape to move on his own. After Dryaana nervously offers to carry him, Ruel gets down with Cassian's support instead, breathing hard from the effort. When Dryaana offers to move him by magic, the word magic hooks Ruel instantly because he has never seen it before. Ruel tells her to try it, but Ganian and Cassian reject the idea at the same time because ordinary magic would pour mana directly into his fragile body. Dryaana learns, to her shock, that Ruel is so weak he cannot even endure a basic hold spell. Instead of backing off, Dryaana suddenly vows to make a new kind of magic for him and leaves Ruel wondering what exactly she just committed herself to. Dryaana leads them into an ordinary town house that opens into a shockingly large mansion-like interior by magic. Ruel is genuinely impressed by the expanded house and immediately wants that same kind of magic installed back at Satyria. As Dryaana guides them through the silent research house, Ruel asks to see hold magic after all, this time used on an object instead of him. Dryaana casts hold on the flower pot, and Ruel gets his first real look at magic as wind and shimmering force lifted into the air. Ruel excitedly describes the fluttering aura wrapping the pot, and Dryaana freezes because most people should not be able to see mana at all. Ganian asks in a suddenly serious tone if Ruel really sees it too, and both he and Cassian dodge the explanation when Ruel pushes for answers. Trying to recover, Dryaana hurries them to a sealed room and finally admits her master has locked himself inside ever since Ruel was cast out. The next blow lands when Dryaana reveals the sealed man is the former commander of the Magic Knights and also Ruel's uncle, Tyson Satyria. Ruel does not trust anyone named Satyria on instinct, but he needs the Magic Knights badly enough to gamble and step inside. Inside, the room hits him like a hallucination forest packed with flowers and a scent so heavy it almost makes him vomit. The cane striking soil instead of floor tells Ruel this is illusion magic, so he pushes deeper instead of standing still. Following a faint man's voice through the flowers, Ruel finds a neatly groomed stranger standing before two graves. One of the gravestones carries Ruel's own name, and the sight instantly turns the whole meeting sour. When Ruel bluntly says he is not dead, Tyson first mistakes him for a hallucination born from his own phantasmagoria. Ruel calls him uncle and forces the truth in front of him, and Tyson stumbles closer in disbelief, shaking as he touches Ruel's shoulder. The instant Tyson tries to confirm him with magic, mana surges into Ruel, blood bursts from his mouth, and he crumples in agony. Tyson's illusion breaks apart on the spot, revealing the plain room as he grabs the bloodied Ruel and finally bursts out of the isolation he hid in for years. Ruel wakes later under an unfamiliar ceiling, aching all over, and immediately coughs up black blood before the ringing in his ears stops. Once he can hear again, he finds Cassian and Ganian at his bedside, both looking like they have been waiting through the worst of it. Ganian angrily blames Tyson for flooding Ruel with mana, and Tyson stands nearby with swollen eyes like a criminal at the sickbed he nearly caused. They tell Ruel he has been down for about 2 days, and only Cassian's top-grade potion kept the mana damage from killing him outright. That explanation finally clicks for Ruel. The fluttering force he noticed before was mana, which means he really can see it. His first reaction is pure frustration, because with this body too weak to hold mana, his dream of becoming an archmage still slips through his hands. The moment he wakes fully, Ganian grabs Tyson by the collar and tears into him for nearly killing the nephew who kept fighting alone for years. Ganian's fury cuts deeper when he says Ruel only just managed to walk for the first time in 5 years, and Tyson goes pale hearing what he missed. Ruel cuts through the chaos with one quiet request for water, and the whole room falls back under his control. After sending Ganian and Dryaena outside, Ruel asks to speak with Tyson alone despite his own shaking hands and weakness. Tyson notices Ruel still using breath and realizes with alarm that this child has never really been allowed to rest. Ruel makes Tyson sit, and the older man obeys awkwardly like someone who has forgotten how to be around people at all. When Tyson apologizes for everything, Ruel deliberately tells him to forget the past because he needs this broken man looking forward, not drowning in regret. Then Ruel offers Tyson a way back by asking the one question that matters now: "Can you protect me this time, uncle?" By introducing himself again from scratch, Ruel makes it clear he is covering the past on purpose and offering Tyson a new beginning. Tyson answers with his own name, drops to his knees, and swears by a mana pact that he will protect Ruel even at the cost of his life. Ruel brushes aside the grand oath and immediately starts treating Tyson like useful family again by saying he only needs a few practical things done. A careful question about Ruel's disease turns the conversation again when Tyson insists Ruel was healthy as a child and only became sick after being thrown out. That revelation rattles Ruel, because it means the sickness may not have been lifelong at all and his old assumptions about Carbina and Mineta no longer fit cleanly. Before Tyson can drown in excuses, Ruel cuts him off, says he believes him, and moves straight to the point: "Come back to Soteria." Ruel accepts Tyson back, then gives him his first order right away: bury the past for now and move forward. When Cassian returns with water, Ruel has him bring out the cookies so Tyson can inspect the strange healing power inside them. The instant Tyson touches the cookies, he notices trace regenerative power in them and starts analyzing them like a wizard who has finally found a live problem again. Tyson's verdict is blunt: the power inside the cookies is only a trace, and if even that helps Ruel this much, Ruel's condition is dangerously bad. Ruel decides the result is good enough for him and immediately eats one, enjoying the clean burst of relief it gives his battered body. Even after nearly dying, Ruel refuses to stay put any longer and gets out of bed, taking his cane from Cassian because he has too much left to do. Tyson panics and begs him to stop, but Ruel leaves the room anyway, deciding the road back is better than lying here any longer. Outside the room, Ganian asks if this is not too much even for Ruel, and Ruel answers that he will just rest in the carriage instead. Tyson bursts into the hallway with mana sparking around him, frantic and desperate because he cannot bear the thought of losing Ruel again. With Tyson spiraling in front of him, Ruel stays calm and asks Ganian one practical question: "Have you ever fought a wizard?" Ganian draws his sword. Ruel tells him to be polite because Tyson is still his uncle, and the warning somehow sounds more dangerous than merciful. At the worst possible second, Dryaena arrives with tea, sees Tyson and Ganian about to clash, and drops everything in shock. Ruel tells Dryaena to evacuate the area and call a doctor, casually predicting that her master is going to lose. As they head for the carriage, Cassian agrees there is no easier target than a wizard who has lost his composure, and Ruel coolly asks how long it will take. Cassian estimates 5 minutes, and the story proves him almost generous when Ganian joins them at the carriage only moments later. When Ruel asks about Tyson, Ganian says the wizard cried, which somehow sounds more humiliating than being beaten. Ganian insists he barely used force and mostly talked with a sword in hand, leaving Ruel wisely uninterested in the details. Still, Ruel admits he wants Tyson to understand one thing clearly now: he does not have time to be smothered. Ganian says Tyson understood well enough to cry, and the warm way both men look at Ruel after that only irritates him more. Ruel keeps one last truth to himself as the carriage rolls on: even if they only met today, Tyson did not feel like a stranger. Elsewhere, a servant nervously enters the room of Lumina's eldest son, Hale, who is already drunk in broad daylight and stinking of alcohol. The servant reports that the Blue Knight of Cyronian has come to see him, and Hale laughs like it has to be some kind of insane joke. His disbelief turns ugly fast, because as a disgraced eldest son he cannot imagine why someone as famous as the Blue Knight would seek him out. Then the servant adds there is another person with the knight, and that detail makes Hale stop and think of the strange offer he rejected a year ago. Unsure whether this visit is another trap or a real chance, Hale finally orders the servant to bring them in. Ruel arrives with Ganian and Cassian, letting the famous knight do the talking while he keeps his own name hidden and his purpose unreadable. Before the talk even starts, the reek of alcohol and Hale's flushed face tell Ruel exactly what kind of ruined noble he is dealing with. One look is enough for Ruel to judge the whole situation as rotten from the start, because a man this drunk cannot be handled like a normal person. In Hale Lumina's drunken room, Hale barely looks at Ruel's group and treats them like trash from the start. Ruel coldly sends the servant away, and Cassian shuts the door so Hale is trapped with them. When Ganian calls out to him, Hale suddenly grabs a wine glass and hurls it straight at Ruel. The attack never reaches Ruel, because Ganian catches the glass and slams Hale to the floor in the same breath. Ganian cheerfully introduces himself as the Blue Knight, making it obvious Hale has picked a fight with the wrong people. Ruel takes Hale's seat, looks down at him, and starts the interrogation with no patience left. Ruel demands to know who told Hale to pour money into Soteria through Mineta, because he knows Hale did not invent that move himself. Hale tries to laugh it off as a dead issue and even talks about more interest, still pretending he has the upper hand. Ruel flips the whole situation by saying Hale used his father's money to support Mineta, and Mineta died as a traitor. When Ganian backs him up by saying treason is treason in any country, Hale finally realizes this is no bluff. Ruel finally gives his name as the Lord of Soteria, and Hale's arrogance dies on the spot. Hale scrambles up and bows in panic, but Ruel rejects his noble introduction and calls him what he is now, a traitor. Ruel lets Hale stew in terror, reminding him that all his games with Soteria may cost him the only thing he still values, his noble name. At Ruel's call, Cassian lays copied evidence on the table and leaves Hale alone with the proof of his ruin. Hale breaks down and begs for forgiveness, but Ruel only sneers that a penniless nobody is exactly what Hale will become without that title. Outside, Cassian asks if they are done here, and Ruel answers that Hale's debt scam will be settled properly through his parents too. Ruel bluntly says Hale's parents are guilty too, whether they knew about the theft or let it happen, so Lumina as a whole is about to pay. He asks to borrow Ganian's name again, and Ganian laughs that he is only getting more famous. When they meet Corinth's Lumina, the family head warmly welcomes Ganian first and barely registers Ruel as anything important. Ruel cuts through the slight by stepping forward, offering his hand first, and naming himself as Ruel Soteria, which finally makes Corinth falter. Corinth freezes at the old family name, and Ruel has to spell it out again. He is not just a Soteria, he is the Lord of Soteria. Ganian confirms Ruel's identity, and Corinth instantly drops into proper host mode and leads them inside. Inside the private room, Corinth offers tea, but Ruel refuses the pleasantries because he came for one brutal sentence. Ruel opens by stating that Corinth's son committed treason, and Ganian immediately hands over the documents. Corinth protests that treason is too serious a word, but Ganian swears on his own name that the charge is true. As Corinth reads, his act cracks, and his trembling hands show he recognizes the danger immediately. Corinth tries to shrink the whole thing into raising his son badly, and Ruel coldly throws the blame back where it belongs, on the family head himself. When Corinth dares to say Ruel should take responsibility too, Ruel reveals he brought a second set of proof aimed directly at the father. The second evidence packet proves Corinth knew Hale was taking money from the family safe, ignored it, and even kept supplying more funds. Cornered at last, Corinth drops the pretense and asks Ruel what he wants. Ruel demands that Lumina erase Soteria's debt and bind itself with mana contracts never to enter Soteria or retaliate later. Corinth visibly hates it, but the price is still cheaper than treason, so he forces himself to agree. He signs the debt waiver and both mana contracts under Ganian's watch, and Ruel wins back another piece of Soteria's freedom. Ruel leaves with aristocratic poise and even mocks Corinth with a line about being friends now that the beast has a leash. Back outside, Ruel thanks Ganian and Cassian in high spirits, already thinking about how much they have helped him. Once they sit down to eat, Ruel is miserable over his restricted food while Ganian and Cassian enjoy real meat in front of him. Cassian shuts down Ruel's complaints with a blunt warning that reckless eating could really kill him. Ganian asks if they are heading straight to the Shio family next, and Ruel says no because he has one stop to make first. When Ruel names the Adventurer Guild, Cassian jokes about him becoming an adventurer, and Ruel shocks them by saying that is exactly the plan. The next chapter picks up at the same table with Ganian and Cassian laughing it off, but Ruel stays serious and insists he really is going to become an adventurer. Ruel turns serious and explains he needs a fake identity so he can move outside without every action dragging Soteria into attention too early. He wants the achievements to come back to Soteria later, not to vanish in anonymity, so his answer is a deliberate double life. Ganian likes the idea immediately, because Soteria still needs time to get strong enough before the world starts watching. Ruel casually assumes both Ganian and Cassian will be part of this new identity too, because he cannot fight on his own anyway. Cassian warns that adventurers need proper identities, but Ruel has already thought ahead and insists they can find a trustworthy guild. At the Hand of the Wind Guild, Ruel proves he is the Lord of Soteria by revealing the glowing crest on the back of his hand. The old guild leader immediately bows and agrees to help once he realizes the Lord of Soteria is personally offering him this chance. Cassian is stunned that Ruel already knew exactly which guild would keep their secret, and Ruel just smiles instead of explaining. When the guild leader asks for names, Cassian keeps his own, Ganian takes Gaff, and Ruel chooses Han without hesitation. The name hits Ruel privately, because Han is his old real name, but he swallows the feeling and takes the card anyway. The three of them leave with fresh bronze rank adventure IDs, and Ruel says they still have one more stop before dealing with the Barons. Ruel leads them toward Matiro's guild, already thinking about the trap that ruined Hand of the Wind and the slave trade hidden behind it. Up close, the Matiro's guild looks absurdly rich, and Ruel uses harmless curiosity as cover while quietly checking the place out. Ruel starts drifting toward a narrow back alley beside the building, pretending he is only sightseeing. Before he can get closer, Cassian yanks Ruel back as a blood-scented boy suddenly crashes out of the alley and onto the ground. Ganian and Cassian go on guard, because a stranger appearing from that alley could still be a trap. The boy begs them to save him, and Ruel looks past the dirt and injuries long enough to see a huge unstable mana presence around him. Ruel instantly realizes who he has found: Eris, the future genius archmage who was meant to become Ganian's right hand. Ignoring the wary looks behind him, Ruel reaches out and tells the boy he is taking him with him. Later over food, Ganian awkwardly apologizes to the rescued boy, but Ruel cuts in when he sees that too much attention is only making Eris more uncomfortable. The boy finally gives his name as Eris, and Ruel hides his satisfaction behind a warm smile and more food. Ruel introduces the group in a deliberately biased way by calling Ganian the bad brother, trying to win Eris's trust one step at a time. Ruel sees Eris is still too tense to talk, so he tells him to finish eating first and promises to listen after. Ganian and Cassian step outside, and Ganian quietly says what both of them already noticed: Eris was abused badly, not just roughed up. They connect the dots to slave trafficking and agree that Ruel is almost certainly about to involve himself in tearing that rot apart. Ganian ends on a half-joking, half-serious thought that trying to pair Ruel and Eris as same-age companions is pointless, because Ruel may look young but never really acts like it. While Ruel rests nearby, Cassian casually corrects Ganian and reveals that Ruel is actually 17, not 14. Ganian is left feeling stupid for trying to push friendship when he did not even know Ruel's age or what happened to him at 12. Cassian heads off to prepare more snacks for Ruel, still baffled that all that food never seems to put any weight on him. Later at the table, Ruel keeps eating meat pie and cake with serious focus and even offers Eris extra snacks to make him relax. Watching them, Cassian quietly studies Eris and notices that the boy's eyes are not dead at all, but sharp in the way mages often are. To test him, Cassian lightly raises his aura toward Eris, and Eris's mana instantly lashes back to protect Ruel. Cassian is impressed that this frightened boy has such brave golden mana, and Ruel immediately notices Cassian looking at Eris too closely. After the meal, Ruel invites Eris to speak freely, but his coughing fit makes the offer of help look almost backwards. When Cassian hands over rich cocoa and Ruel gently keeps pressing, Eris finally asks for help. Eris explains that 3 years ago he was sold over his uncle's debt, though the farmer who first took him in did not abuse him. That changed a year ago, when the debtor stole the farm by force, dragged Eris away, and worked him in the mines until he was injured. After that, Materos' people locked him in the guild basement as merchandise for human trafficking and beat obedience into him. When Ruel asks whether Eris wants revenge or wants everyone saved, Eris answers with painful honesty that he just wants to be saved himself. Ruel accepts that answer without hesitation and promises both to save Eris and to take revenge for him. Since Materos is already tied to other business Ruel needs to crush, he quietly orders Cassian to gather detailed proof that very night. The next morning, Ruel wakes in worse shape, clutching his chest as another hard coughing fit hits. Cassian immediately sees that Ruel is unwell, but Ruel insists he can manage and pushes to continue the plan. Ruel lays out the split. He will meet Ganian and the barons, while Cassian raids the slave trading side first and frees the people under the guild. Cassian points out that Ganian could do that job too, but Ruel keeps it with Cassian because he wants those rescued people to become Soteria's people, not Ganian's followers. Even after warning him again to take care of himself, Cassian can only accept that Ruel is going to force this through. Before visiting Materos, Ruel buys a cheap shield-shaped necklace so he can bluff harder with the authority of a blue knight and Soteria's name. Ganian keeps staring because Cassian clearly told him to watch Ruel closely, and Ruel's constant coughing is making even him nervous. At Materos' lavish mansion gate, Ganian flashes his blue knight identity and Ruel follows with his own Soteria claim to force immediate respect. The bluff works perfectly, and the guards rush them inside to meet the master of the house without any real inspection. Materos Henya greets them with polished noble manners, and Ruel instantly feels how fake and revolting the man's refinement is. Ruel skips any polite introduction and makes it clear he came to talk business, which keeps Materos eager and off balance at the same time. Ruel asks for Akelti and then lets Materos ramble about his guild, deliberately feeding the man's greed while they wait for the trap to close. Then Ruel suddenly cuts into Materos' weak point by bringing up his gambling debt and the possibility that his shining guild could vanish. Materos takes the bait and nervously checks the time, thinking this tense visit might end with money for his debt. When the tea arrives, Ganian silently checks it for danger and signals Ruel that at least the cup itself is not poisoned. Ruel keeps talking through another coughing spell, drinks the hot tea to push it down, and finally reveals that the guild he regrets losing is not Materos' guild at all but the Hand of the Wind. With a mocking smile, Ruel crushes Materos' hope and says he never came to save that trash or pay off its debts. Ruel orders Ganian to fix that stupid expression with facts, and Ganian slams the gathered evidence onto the table. The documents expose Materos for framing the Hand of the Wind with paid testimony, and for making money through illegal slave trafficking. Ganian shuts down Matiros' stammering protest with raw pressure, and Matiros can only bow his head and shake. Rule reveals why Matiros kept checking the clock. By now the soldiers should already be on their way, and his escape window is gone. Rule stands despite his weak condition and coldly tells Matiros that both his guild and this mansion are finished anyway. Cornered and screaming that they ruined everything he built, Matiros suddenly lunges at Rule with a hidden device in his hand. Ganian blocks him in time, but the hidden weapon bursts anyway and sprays a poison neither of them expected. Rule immediately vomits dark blood, his skin turning purple as the poison tears through his already fragile body. Matiros starts laughing that the attack worked, and Ganian answers by smashing him in the face with a furious punch. Ganian drops everything to catch Rule, but Rule's body is already failing as burning pain and fading sounds swallow him whole. Rule drifts in and out for days, hearing Cassian's voice, catching glimpses of a guilty Ganian and tearful Eris, but never finding the strength to fully wake. 5 days later, Rule finally opens his eyes for real, half blinded by morning sun and weak enough that his first clear thought is hunger. Cassian keeps his tone bright, tells Rule he has not broken his promise, and explains that the poison left him unconscious for 5 full days. Rule realizes he survived only because of his recovery power, and that next time he may need a new resistance ability just to stay alive. Cassian admits even he did not recognize the poison at first and had to spend precious time figuring out how to detoxify it. Matiros has already been beheaded for harming nobility, but the bigger shock is what Cassian found while tracing the slave route. At the trading site, Cassian found a paper marked with a flame pattern, tying Matiros' slave operation to the same faction behind Carbina's attack on Soteria. With the conspiracy link confirmed, Cassian orders 1 more day of rest before Rule goes to the Hand of the Wind Guild. That peace lasts only until Ganian bursts through the door, unable to hide his worry or his shame. Ganian stays physically far from the bed as he apologizes, blaming himself for Rule nearly dying under his watch. Rule claps to make him come closer and turns the guilt into a debt instead, saying Ganian now owes him one. Ganian still cannot let it go, replaying how horrible Rule looked as he vomited blood and turned purple in his arms. Rule finally tells him to stop the sweet talk and leave, promising that when Ganian comes back he should have shaken off the guilt for good. Instead of simply leaving, Ganian draws his sword and makes a formal knight's oath to defend Rule's Soteria with his honor. Rule is horrified because a cross-border vow like that could become a disaster later, but Ganian just smiles and walks out anyway. Soon after, Eris enters carefully, healthier than before, and bows low with a choked thank you and apology. Rule brushes the apology aside, and Eris gets even more moved when Rule says helping him was partly his own selfish choice. After confirming Eris has nowhere to go and is still trapped by debt, Rule decides it is time to harvest what he planted. Rule offers Eris a place as his escort, and Eris can barely believe someone like him is being chosen at all. To make it final, Rule reveals the glowing Soteria crest on the back of his hand right in front of Eris. Right after Flen finishes thanking him, Rule abruptly invites the Hand of the Wind Guild to abandon Lumina and move its whole operation to Soteria. Rule points out that Flen already knows how dangerous Baron Matiros is, so Soteria would be a cleaner place to rebuild as a branch and grow under his protection. In Rule's eyes, Flen's management skills are the real prize, and the ruined request center in Sissel makes this the perfect moment to replace it with a guild under Soteria's control. Rule sweetens the deal by naming Masu Forest, promising a steady stream of requests, and making it clear he will ignore guild business as long as they do not cross his line. When Flen hesitates over local resistance and commissions, Rule cuts through it with a blunt reminder that he is the Lord and every rotten institution in Soteria is about to be cleaned out. That casual confidence wins Flen over, and he drops the distance, formally introducing himself and accepting cooperation with Soteria. Rule immediately gives Flen his first job: take the workers rescued from Matiros' slave operation and get them safely to Soteria. Flen quietly shows his disgust at the slave trade, and Rule reveals that he and Cassian were among the adventurers who exposed Matiros in the first place. Rule tells Flen to get the rescued workers safely to Soteria and make the job count, promising a reward rich enough to bind Hand of the Wind to him. As he leaves, Rule orders Cassian to contact Minute and expand the Sissel Request Center building, already treating the new guild arrangement as settled. Inwardly, Rule fixes on the real foundation of his recovery plan. Once he secures more money, he can start rebuilding Soteria properly. Since recovering the merchants Mineta sold off is unrealistic, Rule decides his next move is to seize a capable merchant house instead and heads for the Shio family after one more debt collection stop. Later, Rule enjoys how easily Ganian's Blue Knight name opens doors, while Ganian jokes that a title this useful should be handed to Cassian too. Rule shuts down Ganian's joke about lending out the Blue Knight name, and the talk turns into sharp banter when Ganian complains he needs a fight, and Cassian dryly tells him to go pay adventurers instead. To stop that mood from turning bloody, Rule tells Ganian to spar with Cassian later, which only makes Cassian snap back that he is a butler, not a knight. Cassian and Ganian trade one more jab about butlers, knights, and sword-brained idiots before following Rule deeper inside, with Ganian privately deciding Cassian would actually be fun to fight. At the Shio estate, The second daughter Surti Shio politely welcomes Ganian first, making it obvious she values the Blue Knight's status above everyone else in the room. When she finally asks about the others, Ruel names himself and Cassian, and Surti's pleased little smile shows she thinks a weakened Soteria Lord has just walked into her hands. Surti leads Ruel inside herself, but her narrowed eyes at Cassian make it clear she is already measuring every useful person around him. On the way, Surti probes their relationship, and Ruel answers by calling Ganian his only close friend, deliberately staking a claim before she can try to pull him away. Ganian backs that up without hesitation by calling Ruel his best friend, and Surti keeps smiling, but Ruel immediately reads the danger she was testing for. Ruel already knows why he chose to face Surti instead of going straight to the Shio family head. Unlike Lumina, this house bends heavily around its ambitious second daughter. In the formal drawing room, Surti offers tea and waits for Ruel to speak first, but he deliberately drags out the silence until his small cough breaks it. Surti tries to frame the cough as concern for his health, but Ruel uses the opening to say the thing hurting him most is money. That blunt turn lets Surti drop her warmth too, and she openly declares that she has no intention of repaying anything beyond letting him in the door. She even mocks him for not proudly announcing himself at the gate, trying to recast this visit as a desperate favor obtained through Ganian's name. Ruel knocks that argument apart at once, saying a true knight never hides his name and the real fault lies with servants who failed to ask for it. Forced back a step, Surti apologizes for slighting the Blue Knights, and Ruel accepts with smug ease because Ganian's rank gives him all the leverage here. Once the room settles, Ruel finally states his real demands. The debt is gone, the mine she stole must be returned, and he is not finished yet. Surti laughs at his demands as if he has no grip on reality, but Ganian cuts in by dropping a stack of documents and telling her to judge the situation properly first. Surti tries to reassert her pride as one of the 6 families, but Ruel cuts through it by asking why anyone should be polite to a traitor. When she erupts at hearing his name used so bluntly, Ruel turns the meeting upside down by revealing that Mineta killed himself out of guilt after trying to open Soteria's gates to an unknown group. He tells her to read the proof and see for herself what kind of crime she touched when she lent money to Mineta. Surti snaps at the servant who arrives with tea, then drops back into her seat and starts reading, her breathing getting worse with every page. As the truth sinks in, Surti remembers exactly what she did. She knowingly funded Mineta because she wanted Soteria weakened enough to benefit her future. The moment she realizes she helped a traitor, Ganian's sword is suddenly at her neck without so much as a warning sound. With Ganian's blade at her throat, Ruel calmly adds the next terms: stop going after Soteria and never harm Soteria again. Then Ruel lands the final blow by demanding Surti swear allegiance to him, turning a debt dispute into total political submission. Surti realizes refusing could drag her whole family down with her, so she bites her lip bloody and bows her head in humiliation. She accepts and even volunteers for a mana contract, binding herself so completely that betraying Ruel later would kill her. Once she is bound, Ruel coolly offers the reward attached to her surrender. He will help Surti become the next head of the Shio family. For Ruel, the deal is even better than revenge. If Surti takes over the Shio family, the house will still look independent, while quietly serving under him. He still makes one thing clear before leaving: her rudeness and debt are not forgotten, and she will pay him back soon. Leaving the Shio family after another clean victory, Ruel is already counting how many noble houses he has bent to his will when Ganian suddenly cuts in, uneasy that something feels off. Back from the Shio meeting, Ganian bluntly says that if he were in Ruel's place, he would have cut the wizard down before she could destroy any evidence. Ruel quickly warns him to watch that kind of talk, but Ganian shrugs it off and jokes that being the younger son of the Croft family lets him enjoy freedom. When Cassian meets them, he expects Ruel to return to the mansion, but Ruel proudly says no, and Cassian's smile freezes at once. Ruel brushes off his condition with a weak joke that he is always sick anyway, while Cassian swallows his irritation and asks where he thinks he is going now. Ruel says he is heading to the inn and orders Cassian to investigate, while Ganian casually declares that he is going there too. Ganian reveals he is not following Ruel at all. He is going because Eris asked him to teach swordsmanship. Ruel remembers Eris's healing training wounds and immediately gets protective, warning Ganian not to start coveting him as some new talent to snatch away. Ganian says Eris chose him as the teacher, then strides ahead, leaving Ruel smoothing his cane and feeling uneasy. Back at the inn, Ruel coughs up black blood again, and Cassian coolly notes that the costly magic handkerchief works exactly as intended. After Ruel coughs blood several times and nearly collapses from exhaustion, he finally drops onto the bed in the inn room. Cassian stops scolding and gently presses a small cooling magic item to Ruel's forehead to bring down the fever. He sets out water for rinsing and drinking, tells Ruel to stop thinking about moving, and takes over the merchant investigation himself. Ruel gives in, stops overthinking, and falls asleep before the fever fully drags him under. Only after confirming Ruel is asleep, Cassian signals a hidden guild member and orders him to watch Ruel if things get worse. The hidden contact reports there is still no news on 18, the organization Materos built to devour Soteria and sell its people. Cassian also receives a new request from the guild chief, reminding us he never stopped taking assassination work even while serving Ruel. Cassian leaves on that commission after ordering the Hidden Watcher to keep an eye on Rule. Elsewhere, Eris pushes through brutal running practice until he finally reaches Ganian's impossible target and earns a curt pass. Ganian sits beside the exhausted Eris and realizes the boy cleared a trial meant to be impossible, the same brutal kind of test his own teacher once used on him. After Eris catches his breath, Ganian hands him water and finally asks the question he should have asked from the start. Why does he want sword training? Eris answers without hesitation that he wants to become Rule's sword, and the blunt loyalty catches even Ganian off guard. Impressed, Ganian promises to keep teaching him for as long as he stays in the country. When Rule wakes later with a pounding head, Cassian is already there with breakfast prepared at exactly the right time. Rule immediately suspects Cassian somehow timed his waking, and Cassian flatly admits he put him to sleep because watching him ruin himself was unbearable. Cassian reports that Rule still vomited during the night, proof that he stayed up caring for him even while using aura to steal bits of rest for himself. The two trade dry complaints about rest, but Rule cuts through it and demands the investigation results first. As he eats and reads, Rule realizes Cassian still works nights and quietly presses until Cassian admits he is continuing his assassin work too. Cassian says he kills by his own standards and plans to keep going, and Rule's only answer is a blunt order to at least take care of his body. Then Rule's mood shifts when he finds the right target in the documents, the failing Beto merchants. He throws Cassian 3 jewels called Satyria's Tears and orders him to find out how cheaply the ruined merchant house can be bought. Cassian is stunned because each jewel is worth a fortune, and Rule reveals he pulled emergency money from Satyria's hidden safe. Rule even tells him to buy ice cream with whatever is left, a tiny reward that catches Cassian off guard because Rule already knows his sweet tooth. Rule explains why Beto is worth grabbing now. Another merchant ruined its credibility with a frame-up, and if they fix that scandal quickly, the fallen house can explode in value. After Cassian leaves to handle the purchase, Rule keeps eating and thinks through the real key to the case. If the rival stole the proof, that proof can still be recovered. Eris arrives next, freshly washed after morning training, and politely asks if he can stay in the room until Cassian comes back. Rule notices Eris looks even bigger than before and silently suffers over his own frail build while telling him to sit in front instead of looming behind him. When Eris happily says he is training hard because he wants to become Rule's sword, Rule abruptly redirects his whole future. Rule tells him he is not built for aura at all, because Rule can see mana and the mana around Eris is far too strong for him to waste his talent on becoming a normal knight. Eris protests that escorting sounds like a knight's job, so Rule excitedly pitches him a better role, a wizard who hides his power and pretends to be one. The idea wins Eris over completely, and he eagerly promises to follow Rule's judgment and stay away from aura training. Rule even scripts the exact line Eris should use on Ganian, telling him to reject aura for now by arguing that basics and stamina come first. Cassian returns right as Rule finishes eating and reports that the Beto purchase is already done. But Cassian brings a catch. The Beto side wants to see Rule in person before the deal truly settles. Rule immediately reads the situation. A cornered merchant is trying to pass trouble onto the newcomer instead of facing it alone. He is not offended by the trick, he just decides to answer a tiger with another tiger, and tells Cassian to call Ganian by promising there may be a fight. Eris quietly asks to come too, and even after Rule warns that it will not be pretty, he refuses to back down. Rule finally agrees, and a moment later Ganian bursts in with Eris, already excited enough to run ahead before Rule is even ready. With Cassian's help, Rule gets bundled into absurdly thick layers scarf and earmuffs because Cassian refuses to let his fragile master step out half-protected again. At last, Rule taps his cane on the floor and leads the way out, setting off for the next confrontation at Beto Merchants. Rule arrives at the Merchants of Beto and sees a crowd of grim faces packed outside, but he walks in like the mess is already his to handle. Rule quietly checks Cassian and Ganian, and their reaction makes it clear the people outside are not even worth worrying about. Eris is the only one visibly nervous, and Rule brushes it off with an easy promise that everything will be fine. A guild member recognizes Cassian and leads the group straight to Jairi, the upper owner running Beto. Rule drops into a seat in Jairi's office, coughing through a lingering fever, and demands to know exactly who he is up against. One look tells Rule that Jairi is already weighing his price like merchandise, which only confirms Jairi is a true merchant at heart. Jairi explains that the merchants of Ribuan are demanding Beto back even after the sale, and Rule cuts through the excuse by calling that merchant behavior no better than thuggery. Before the meeting can settle, shouting erupts outside and the office door flies open. A huge Ribuan man barges in and mocks Rule as a sick junkie, making the threat personal in an instant. The man strides toward Rule, but Cassian's aura stops him cold before he can take another step. When the thug keeps laughing, Cassian apologizes for the noise and kills him in one clean motion. Rule checks on Eris after the sudden beheading and notes that the boy is holding himself together better than expected. Rule sends Ganian out to make the punishment official, using his noble status to tell Ribuan one of their men lost his head for touching him. Ganian hesitates because a knight cannot just kill without cause, so Rule turns back to Jairi and demands the truth about Ribone's backers. Jairi admits Ribuan is tied deep into the underworld, with drugs, kidnappings, and human trafficking behind it. That changes Ganian's objection on the spot, because Ruel calmly reveals he already cut off the underworld boss's neck last night. With the justification settled, Ruel asks for the second in command and prepares Ganian to strike the right place next. Before Ganian leaves, Ruel warmly meets Eris's eyes again, wordlessly pushing him to stay steady as an escort. Once Cassian and Ganian step out, Ruel asks the question he really cares about, and makes Jairi price him openly. The moment Ruel names himself as Ruel Soteria, Jairi's eyes light up and he flatters him as more valuable than any jewel. Ruel cashes in that new debt immediately by demanding 2 swords, one of Beto's best and one for Eris. Then Ruel gives the harsh order that will actually save Beto: fire everyone and rebuild from scratch. When Jairi recalls, Ruel explains that spies rot everything around them, so keeping even the loyal workers will only spread the damage. Ruel finishes by ordering Jairi to show him every new hire list first, making it clear Beto now answers to him. Out in the hallway, Eris hesitates over what he just saw, and Ruel starts explaining that spies are not the only danger around a rotten group. Ruel tells Eris not to treat his words as absolute truth and to look with his own eyes, which lands harder than any simple order could. Cassian suddenly rises from the shadows with the carriage ready, startling Eris badly enough to clamp a hand over his mouth. Trying to recover, Eris asks Cassian to teach him that trick, but Cassian refuses because that path belongs to an assassin, not an escort. Once they are in the carriage, Ruel loosens his collar and falls asleep almost immediately, leaving Eris alone with his questions. Eris finally blurts out whether Cassian is really an assassin, and Cassian answers with a threat sharp enough to prove the point. Eris gets angry at his own weakness, and Cassian bluntly tells him to leave now if he cannot accept what following Ruel means. Cassian starts complaining about Ruel in a way that sounds half bitter and half loyal, painting him as a lord who never sits still and always pushes too far. The mood turns cold when Cassian reveals the real danger. Ruel's illness is unexplained, and it can become fatal at the worst possible moment. Cassian makes Eris face the weight of the job, asking whether he can truly protect Ruel in any situation, not just stand beside him. Eris can only admit he does not know yet, and that honest answer is exactly what Cassian wanted to hear. Cassian tells him he would have stopped the carriage if Eris had answered lightly, because the foundation has to be right from the start. As the ride continues, Cassian studies the still unconscious Ruel and thinks he looks worse than usual today. Later, following a trail of blood into the basement, Ruel finds the hideout turned into a slaughterhouse, with Ganian sitting calmly in the only clean chair. The pressure in the room is so violent that Ruel clutches his chest, and Cassian tells Ganian to dial back his momentum. Ganian admits he is furious because the men here insulted the Blue Knights, and Ruel dryly notes that his response was more than dramatic enough. When Ruel asks about the boss, Ganian slices apart a desk with wind pressure and exposes the terrified man hiding underneath. The hidden boss breaks down at the sight of Ganian, babbles that he is a monster, and faints before he can even be questioned properly. Ganian tosses over a key from the hideout and walks off to cool down, dragging Eris with him so he does not explode alone. Ruel sends Cassian to find whatever the key opens while he stays behind to search for documents himself. Left alone, Ruel studies the clean sword cuts and realizes Ganian only needed 2 swings to turn the place into this mess. He coughs, searches the split desk, and finds nothing useful enough to bother keeping. So Ruel starts looting the boss's body instead, stripping off rings, bracelets, and anything expensive he can carry away. Digging deeper, he pulls out a smooth golden statue and immediately realizes it came from a magic pocket linked to stored wealth. The excitement lasts 1 second too long, because the strain hits Ruel's body and he collapses to the floor with the statue. Even sprawled on the floor, Ruel grins at the thought of how much money must be hidden behind that magic pocket. Cassian comes back, sees Ruel down on the floor smiling beside the statue, and instantly knows something has gone very wrong. When Ruel admits he touched the magic pocket, blood pours from his nose and Cassian explodes in panic. Cassian feeds Ruel only the tiniest bit of aura to keep him alive, terrified that any more would finish breaking his body. The crisis eases just enough for Cassian to explain the rule Ruel never knew. Touching someone else's magic pocket burns through the life energy his body cannot spare. Cassian also reports that he found the secret room, packed up the money Ruel would want, and secured the documents they came for. Ruel insists on going back to Jairi anyway, because a merchant like that cannot be allowed to see weakness this early. Before Cassian leaves to handle the papers, Ruel reminds him to copy everything and keep the originals under his own control. After that, Cassian hands Ruel cookies made by Estelle and disappears, leaving him a tiny bit of comfort in the middle of the wreckage. Alone for a moment, Ruel eats one of Estelle's cookies, shuts his eyes, and tries to force his recovery power to refill the mana he just burned through. Back in Jairi's office, Ruel calmly puts the recovered documents on the table and asks the real question: what will Jairi pay for proof that can restore his ruined merchant house? Instead of lashing out, Jairi studies Ruel and gets hooked on him, because this sickly noble is nothing like the dull, greedy aristocrats he already knows. When Jairi asks what Ruel wants, Ruel answers with one blunt word: you. Jairi jokes that he is expensive, but Ruel cuts straight through his pride and makes it clear he is not buying scraps, he is investing in the man himself. Ruel offers a hand and says nobles and merchants are not equal in rank, but in a deal they stand as equals. And that is exactly the answer Jairi wanted. Then Ruel raises the stakes again by handing Jairi a gold-marked certificate for temporary ownership of one Soteria mine. Ruel makes the terms clear with a cool smile. This is a test, the mine is only temporary. And if Jairi fails, the blame is his alone. After Ruel leaves, Jairi sits alone and realizes just how wild this gamble is. Ruel bought a failing merchant and backed him with a mine instead of cutting ties. A second paper slips loose, and Jairi finds a private note telling him to keep Soteria out of the spotlight and surround himself with Hand of the Wind Guild people, including Cassian. On the wagon ride back, Ganian finally presses Ruel about the deal, baffled that he would save a collapsing merchant house at all. Ruel gives Ganian the shortest answer possible. He did it on a feeling, and somehow that is enough for the others because his instincts have paid off before. While the wagon rolls on, Ruel quietly focuses on his next goal, the hero's power of resistance hidden somewhere along this road, because his body is still far too easy to break. When he finally spots the right stretch of road, Ruel suddenly orders the wagon to stop and uses a bathroom excuse to head into the woods. Once they are deep enough in the trees, Ruel asks Cassian for the poison he had ordered prepared for the original resistance test. Ruel refuses to explain much beyond saying he wants to live and stop being sick, then leaves Cassian behind because he knows Cassian would never let him do this. Alone in the rough forest, Ruel pushes through the uneven ground searching for the red flowers tied to the hidden power. His power of recovery suddenly reacts and pulls his attention left, guiding him straight to a cluster of red flowers before he even touches anything. The hidden power speaks first and shocks Ruel by waiving the usual test, because someone who already knows pain does not need to be tested again. Instead of forcing him to drink the poison, the power of resistance enters Ruel directly and promises to endure pain and bodily suffering in his place. Ruel almost tests the poison out of curiosity, but the memory of nearly dying from it last time kills that idea fast. On the way back, Ruel realizes Cassian followed him anyway, and the assassin quietly rises right out of his shadow. Cassian admits he saw a thin film wrap around Ruel, and Ruel confirms he gained the power of resistance, strong enough to endure things like poison. Cassian immediately asks if Ruel actually drank the poison, and Ruel snaps back that even he is not reckless enough to repeat that disaster. By the time they return to the wagon, Ganian and Eris are turning the ride into training, with Ganian balancing on top of a shaking Eris just to kill boredom. Ganian circles Ruel and senses that something changed, and even Eris can tell Ruel's mana has become denser than before. Ruel brushes the questions aside and gets everyone moving again, satisfied that the new power is already showing. When the party reaches Soteria Mansion, silver-armored knights line the gate and salute Ruel with real discipline this time. Chainall welcomes him back, and even while coughing his way past, Ruel praises the knights and tells them to be strong. After Ruel goes inside, the knights stay at attention, and his simple words leave Chainall and the rest even more determined to train harder. Later in Ruel's room, he asks how his knights look now, and even Ganian admits they seem worth testing in a real fight. Ruel immediately turns that into a plan, promising Ganian all the fights he wants and telling Eris that night training starts tomorrow. Before leaving, Eris promises he will get stronger too, and Ruel gives him a tired but approving answer just to finally clear the room. Once he is alone, Ruel reviews the day and realizes he got the merchant, the guild link, the escort, and a better path forward, but still no answer for his own illness. A knock breaks his thoughts, and Tyson, head of the Magic Knights, rushes in worried and starts checking how badly Ruel's body has held up. Then Tyson notices something unusual, lights a small flame on his fingertip, and tests Ruel's wrist against it like a researcher who just found a miracle. The test confirms it. Ruel has become resistant to mana, so the new power of resistance is already changing how his body handles magical strain. Excited, Tyson gives Ruel a bracelet made by Dryana that boosts mana tolerance and steadies the mana around his dangerously fragile body. As soon as Ruel puts it on, a faint tickling aura spreads over him, and Tyson happily proves the bracelet works by showing that the same flame now feels even less warm. The moment Tyson hears about Eris, he lights up again and eagerly agrees to teach him, calling the boy's mana beautiful and miraculous. But Tyson's excitement dies the moment Ruel coughs, and when he asks about the illness, Ruel admits it is bad and cannot be treated yet. Ruel reassures him in the only way he can, insisting he will not die, and Tyson clings to that promise even though he still looks desperate. Tyson reports that he brought many people with potential for Soteria, but then the conversation turns personal when he begs Ruel not to carry the Lord's burden if it is destroying him. Ruel shuts that down at once and says Soteria is his, so raising it back up is his job whether his body likes it or not. Tyson finally backs down, tells Ruel he has always thought of him like a son, and leaves after promising healthy food for dinner. When the room goes quiet again, all the day's progress stops matching for a moment as pain floods Ruel's exhausted body, and he grips the blanket to endure it alone. Back in his room, Ruel is hit by such brutal pain that Cassian looks at the blood and sweat-soaked bedding and jokes to himself that it looks like bath prep. Even through the agony, Ruel snaps that Cassian is noisy, and Cassian coolly answers that talking means he is still holding on. Cassian offers to put him to sleep so he will not feel the pain, but stubborn Ruel refuses and endures it awake. Because Mineta poisoned him for years, Ruel still distrusts medicine and has been avoiding painkillers even now. When the pain gets too fierce to hide anymore, Ruel finally gives in and tells Cassian to bring the painkiller. But before Cassian can return, the attack suddenly breaks on its own, leaving Ruel drained, starving, and cursing his body all over again. The second Cassian comes back with medicine and water, Ruel ignores it and demands a bath first so he can eat properly afterward. Later at dinner, Ganian casually sniffs the air and blurts out that Ruel smells like blood again, instantly freezing the whole table. Ruel tries to shut the mood down at once, brushing it off as one of his usual symptoms and refusing to let dinner turn into a funeral. Instead of explaining himself, Ruel abruptly steers Tyson into work talk and says the magic nights should be announced quietly to the royal family, not made into a public spectacle. He does the same to Eris, cutting off his worry and demanding to know whether his training is progressing, because an escort cannot afford to stay soft. Then Ruel turns to Ganian and presses him to stay longer and keep teaching Eris, making it clear Ruel plans to handle Soteria with Cassian beside him. For a moment the meal settles, and Ruel quietly enjoys Tyson's bodybuilding dishes while Cassian keeps taking serious notes beside him. That fragile calm breaks when Ruel suddenly starts coughing again and angry red spots bloom across his hand. While Tyson and Eris panic, Cassian stays icy calm and marks off more ingredients from his list before pulling out allergy medicine. Ruel realizes the awful truth at once. Cassian has been testing every ingredient in real time because no one fully knew what would trigger his allergies. Tyson finally snaps and grabs Cassian by the collar, furious that he treated Ruel like a test subject at the dinner table. Cassian shoves back just as hard, saying Tyson may be family, but he is the one who has actually learned Ruel's condition in detail. Ruel stops the clash and realizes Cassian stirred this up on purpose so Tyson would finally face the truth about his condition. So Ruel finally tells them plainly about his illness and symptoms, and the table sinks into a heavy silence he can no longer dodge. As Ruel talks, Cassian quietly removes the foods he cannot eat and slides the safe dishes closer, turning his loyalty into something almost ruthless. Back in his room, Ruel scolds Cassian for forcing the issue at dinner, but Cassian bluntly says he had to push Tyson and Eris to face Ruel's condition before Ganian leaves. Cassian makes it clear he has already been nudging Eris to choose his path, because once Ganian leaves Ruel will need someone steady at his side. Ruel switches straight to work and asks for Minut's list of people the former lord once employed, because Soteria's empty barren seats cannot stay empty any longer. When Cassian offers to simply send letters, Ruel refuses and decides to personally visit the former barons the very next day. Cassian is half horrified and half impressed by the plan, while Ruel breezily reminds him to prepare the fastest route because he knows very well how bad his own health is. And as if that was not enough, Ruel abruptly asks for a meat pie too, leaving Cassian wondering what kind of monster butler it would take to keep up with him. The next day in the carriage, Cassian reports that all 7 former barons have mysteriously gone on a fishing trip together. That sounds wrong immediately, because the 7 former barons used to hate each other, yet now they have grown close enough to travel together and curse Soteria as one group. Once Cassian says the 7 all gathered right after Ruel returned, Ruel catches the signal at once and decides they are testing him. The ride drains him anyway, so Ruel coughs, closes his eyes, and saves his answer for when he can face them in person. When they reach the lake at Frena, Cassian looks suspiciously refreshed and admits that some rat stepped into his trap while Ruel slept. Ruel takes in the clear, glittering lake and the curious stares around their carriage, but the peaceful view does nothing to soften why he came. Cassian points out the 7 former barons gathered in the worst fishing spot possible, huddled in shallow water where no fish would ever bite. Ruel walks straight up to them, taps his cane loud enough to announce himself, and sits down like he has every right to interrupt their little rebellion. They try to play dumb, but Ruel cuts through the act and tells them to go back to the seats that are still waiting for them. That breaks them, and the men admit they were hurt and resentful but never truly expected Ruel himself to come looking for them. Ruel answers their protest with a cough and a dry apology, saying he came because their little tease was obvious enough to reach him. When their emotions finally spill over, Ruel stops their excuses and asks the only thing he really came to ask: will they help him rebuild Soteria? The 7 answer almost as one, bowing their heads and swearing they will work for Soteria again even if it breaks their bodies. But when Ruel asks why none of them came sooner, the answer is uglier than stubborn pride. They were too ashamed to face the child they failed to protect on the day the old lord died. That confession stirs Ruel's anger at Carbina all over again, but he crushes it down because right now he needs these loyal men back in place, not another spiral into old rage. Even while coughing pitifully, Ruel tells them the future he wants is simple: a Soteria where ordinary people can live and enjoy normal days in peace. He tells them not to wallow anymore, says their appointments will arrive within days, and orders them to go back to work. As he walks off, Ruel realizes filling the barren seats will not magically heal Soteria, because Carbina's damage burned much deeper than he hoped. Cassian tries to knock that guilt out of his head at once, but Ruel only snorts and decides they will have to keep visiting the people who were pushed out. Back at Soteria that night, Eris is still swinging his sword long after sunset, furious at how useless he feels now that he knows how sick Ruel really is. Tyson stops him and admits he is angry too, because all day he has been haunted by how little he understood about Ruel's life now. After thinking about what Ruel really asked of him, Tyson decides his first answer will be turning Eris into a mage instead of a swordsman. Tyson shows him his own purple mana first, gathering it in his palms so Eris can finally see what that power looks like up close. Then Tyson pushes that mana toward Eris, and Eris's body erupts with dazzling golden mana that wipes Tyson's spell away in an instant. Seeing that gold for himself, Eris finally understands, and he takes Tyson's hand as they vow to grow stronger together for Ruel and Soteria. As the carriage nears home after dark, Ruel spots Tyson and Eris training outside and realizes Tyson is finally teaching him. Cassian tells him only Soteria's ear is still missing, meaning the family still lacks its living spy network. Ruel checks the injury at Cassian's chest, and Cassian brushes it off while bitterly criticizing the helpless people Ruel tried to save. When Cassian accuses him of gathering useful people again, Ruel only says he is following traces he never wanted to erase. The mood snaps when Cassian suddenly draws his dagger and orders Ruel to stay inside because enemies are surrounding the carriage. Left alone in the dark, Ruel hears quiet sword clashes outside and realizes more than 8 attackers have closed in. A magic arrow smashes through the carriage window, and flying glass slashes Ruel's hands and face before he can shield himself. Cassian instantly catches one attacker by the throat beside the shattered carriage and asks if Ruel is hurt. When another man rushes in, Cassian slices through both the sword and the attacker's neck in one clean motion. He catches another incoming arrow barehanded, tracks the hidden shooters, and vanishes fast enough that 3 heads fly under the stars. Back at the carriage, Cassian complains that the arrow was enchanted, which is why the tempered window failed so badly. Ruel asks if any attacker survived, but Cassian says he killed them all and only managed to save one clue. The paper bears flame patterns, and Ruel recognizes the same group that once used Carbina to open Soteria's doors. Cassian explains the attackers had burned their own faces to hide their identities, confirming this ambush was prepared to leave almost nothing behind. Ruel calmly lets Cassian pull the glass shards out of his skin, barely reacting even though every piece hurts. But when the wounds keep bleeding, Ruel finally realizes his recovery power is not healing him the way it should. He works out the truth on the spot. His recovery power has hit its current limit, and the ringing in his ears is the power itself warning him to stop. That discovery finally rattles Cassian, because he understands just how close Ruel has been pushing himself to death. Cassian drops the usual politeness and bluntly tells Ruel that a loyal butler would rather die first than watch his master die in front of him. He demands the truth about Ruel's illness and powers, making it clear this is not a request he can ignore anymore. When they reach the mansion, everyone erupts at once over Ruel's injuries and the wrecked carriage until his weak voice forces them quiet. Ganian demands an explanation, and Cassian coolly cuts everyone down by reminding them he is a butler, not the escort they failed to provide. Once Ruel is treated indoors, Ganian stitches the larger wounds by hand and explains that potions are too addictive to use carelessly. Then Ganian checks his condition and goes grim, because Ruel is somehow in worse shape than he was after taking poison. Ganian and Cassian speak over him like this has been quietly monitored for days, and Ruel realizes they have already been comparing his condition behind his back. Ganian insists Ruel must rest now, but Ruel refuses because there is too much to do and he wants at least to slow the disease's progress. After driving them out, Ruel lies alone and bitterly admits the recovery power probably saved him from dying already, even if it still cannot cure him. Over the next 2 weeks, Soteria slowly comes back to life as the Wind Hand Guild relocates in, or profits start flowing, villages recover, and the mansion fills with trained servants. Ruel remains locked in his room the whole time because he collapsed after the ambush, and did not wake up for 4 full days. Even stuck in bed, he learns the last missing ear still has not answered, while more knights gather outside and the estate grows louder with life. Ganian still watches him like a guard, but Ruel quietly celebrates that his recovery power has grown stronger while his body kept getting worse. Cassian also comes prepared with security reports the moment Ruel starts worrying about the estate's defenses again. After a cough and a look over the new information, Ruel decides the underworld rats moving inside Soteria have gone too far. The reports say the local underworld factions suddenly stopped fighting each other and merged, which tells Ruel someone powerful stepped in behind the scenes. When Cassian says he named that mystery Force 18, Ruel dryly mocks the terrible name, but keeps digging into the threat. Today, though, Ruel has had enough of confinement, and decides he is walking out of the room whether Ganian approves or not. Ganian checks him with healing light, and finally admits his condition has improved a little, thanks to stronger recovery power, and the medicine working. Ruel flatters Ganian's unexpected medical talent, and Ganian proudly basks in the praise for a second. Then Ruel stands on his own feet with his cane for the first time in a while, and the simple act feels important enough to everyone in the room. Ganian tries one last time to stop him, but Ruel calmly says he cannot hide while lives in his territory depend on him. Once Ganian gives way, he and Cassian suddenly rush out to bring Ruel newly tailored clothes, which somehow makes the whole thing feel even more ominous. Dressed again and finally outside his room, Ruel takes a slow tour of the mansion to see how much Soteria has changed without him. He is genuinely stunned to find repaired floors, clean walls, tasteful decorations, and a house that finally feels like a real noble estate. Cassian explains that Billow handled the expenses himself because he wanted to repay the debt he feels he owes Ruel. Seeing the servants properly dressed and working in order, Ruel finally feels like the true head of the house. Billow greets him warmly, and Ruel thanks the old butler for rebuilding the mansion so completely. Billow brushes off the hardship, says there is no use dwelling on the past, and jokes that the work is keeping his old age from getting lonely. Ruel suggests adding another exclusive butler because Cassian seems overloaded, and Cassian immediately cuts in to reject it himself. After Ruel walks on, Billow quietly warns Cassian that whatever sword he carries must be pointed only at the master's enemies. Cassian bites back by saying Billow failed to protect his own master, and the old butler accepts the wound without denying it. Instead of arguing, Billow simply asks Cassian not to walk the same bloody path he once did. Elsewhere in the training yard, Eris spars hard with a knight, and nearly wins before falling for a trick at the last second. The knight, Horan, praises Eris as an absurdly fast learner and tells him to stop despairing over the fact that he is already fighting knights within a week. Horan finally guesses the real problem. Eris is scared that Ruel himself might judge him as not good enough. Before Eris can answer, both of them snap to attention because Ruel is suddenly walking toward the training ground in person. Horan is so nervous he can barely speak, because Ruel looks painfully ill even while standing here on his own feet. Ruel notices Eris has grown taller again, and the tiny moment leaves him irrationally annoyed at how fast the boy keeps shooting up. Once Eris admits he is anxious because he lacks experience, Ruel asks Horan how long he has been like this and learns it started when Ruel collapsed. Ruel thanks Horan for lifting Eris's spirits, and Horan answers that Eris is the one meant to protect Ruel directly. Ruel steps right up to Eris and bluntly tells him not to burden himself with expectations he invented, because right now he is still weak. Ruel explains he only told Eris to become strong because Eris still has not turned his back on that path, not because Ruel expects perfection from him now. Then Ruel ends the training, thanks Horan for what he saw, and pushes himself to encourage him despite a deep cough. When Ruel lightly pats his shoulder, Horan is hit by the absurd contrast of that fragile body still throwing itself into Soteria's revival. That tiny gesture fires Horan up so hard that he vows with complete sincerity to protect Soteria. Ruel is left wondering if he has some unknown power that inspires people, but he drops the thought and simply orders Eris to follow him. At Soteria Mansion, Chainall reports that Ruel's departure is finally ready, even though he hated sending him out with so much danger still hanging over the estate. Ruel had ordered Chainall to bring the reserve knights and the men with no combat experience, because this trip is meant to harden them without leaving the mansion undefended. Chainall only gave in because Ganian is going with Ruel, and that one fact tells everyone this outing is still backed by real force. As the carriage prepares to move, Cassian receives a call from the Magic Knights, and Ruel leaves the mansion in Chainall's hands. Chainall answers with fierce resolve that he will protect the mansion no matter what, and the carriage door closes on that promise. Ruel tells Cassian to connect the call, because the Magic Knights are also being tested today, only in secret around Masu Forest instead of in plain sight like the regular knights. Diana answers from the forest and says the Magic Knights have arrived safely, but she immediately slips back into worrying about Ruel's condition instead of the mission. Diana warns him again to leave Masu Forest immediately if his head starts hurting, which makes it obvious she knows a danger she cannot fully explain. Then Diana cheerfully asks for permission to collect monster and plant specimens from the forest, instantly switching from concern to research excitement. Ruel gives her free rein, and Diana ends the call so happily and abruptly that he is left wondering what kind of chaos she plans to cause. Ganian just smiles and says it sounds fun, while Ruel thinks about the Magic Knights hiding underground because, apparently, sunlight gets in the way of their research. That thought leads Ruel back to the carriage itself, which the Magic Knights had swarmed over earlier because they wanted to make one that would never break. Cassian suddenly slams the carriage wall from inside, jolting Ruel, just to test how absurdly sturdy it has become. Eris is impressed, but Cassian pushes for a harsher test, and Ganian follows by throwing a blow strong enough to kill an ordinary man. Even after Ganian's hit, the carriage still does not break, so Cassian calmly decides to try cutting it next. Ruel protests, but Cassian bluntly says he cannot let Ruel get hurt again, especially after all the pressure Ganian has already put on him. The blade leaves only a tiny mark, and the damaged surface heals itself so neatly that the carriage looks untouched almost at once. Cassian decides the carriage can survive almost anything short of monsters on Ganian's level, which is not especially comforting to Ruel. Ruel suddenly realizes his hand is empty, and the others casually confirm that whatever was taken moved too fast for him to follow, with Eris only catching part of it and Ganian enjoying the praise. Ruel shifts back to business and asks if they are going to catch the hidden rat today, but he answers his own question, not yet, because the trap is not ready. After a nap on the road, Ruel wakes up remembering a question he forgot to ask Diana, then stops himself from calling when he imagines the Magic Knights already running wild in the forest. Instead, Ruel orders the carriage stopped and takes only Eris with him, leaving Cassian and Ganian behind because he needs to check something without their presence changing the result. Ruel is checking whether both Masu forest gates are compromised or only one, because the children from Sissel had been slipping through this area too easily. He asks Ganian how the outside-to-inside checkpoint treated him, and Ganian says it was strict enough that even his proof had to be verified directly. That confirms Ruel's suspicion that the problem is probably on the inside route, so he heads for the gate with Eris as his deliberately visible escort. Eris is visibly nervous without Cassian beside them, and Ruel teases him by asking whether the sword from Beto was worth receiving if he cannot trust it now. Eris admits it is a fine sword, and Ruel quietly turns that into an order: use it to protect me until we get there. The weather lifts Ruel's mood, but Eris is so tense that he looks like he is judging every passerby as a possible enemy. Then Ruel sees the gate itself and his mood turns cold, because it is standing wide open with barely any guards and no real screening at all. He walks straight past one guard who does not even bother tracking him with his eyes, and that carelessness tells Ruel the problem is worse than he expected. As he stands there containing his anger, Ruel thinks through the risk plainly. This is Soteria, and a gate this loose could leak people, secrets, and the kingdom itself. Ruel walks back to the guard post and asks who is in charge, only to get the lazy answer that the drowsy captain himself is running this place. The guard tries to brush him off and even hints at arresting him, but Ruel keeps pressing for an immediate connection to the Baron in charge. More guards gather around the argument, and Ruel finally snaps that the Lord was supposed to arrive today, so they should stop making a scene and connect him quietly. That is the moment the captain goes cold, because years at this gate have taught him what real authority looks like, and this sickly boy suddenly feels exactly like it. The captain immediately changes his tone, invites Ruel inside, and all but admits he now believes the real Lord is standing in front of him. As they walk in, Ruel cuts deeper and asks where the real gateway to Soteria is, not the open road everyone can stroll through but the place meant to separate the real from the fake. Seated inside the gate office, Ruel gets the Baron on the communicator, and Will is visibly startled to find the Lord speaking to him from the checkpoint itself. Ruel reminds Will that he was supposed to pass through here today, then immediately steers the conversation to the real issue. Sissel matters, but the gate matters more. He demands to know why the gate is open to everyone and asks the question that matters most: has Will forgotten what Soteria is supposed to protect? Will stammers that he did not think it through and worried people would complain if the gate suddenly became stricter, which only makes the failure sound worse. Ruel answers that temporary inconvenience means nothing next to information being sold forever, because security cannot be sacrificed just to avoid complaints. He orders Will to fix the gate system as fast as possible, and Will promises it will be corrected by the end of the week at the latest. Ruel does not stop there and orders the number of soldiers at the gate doubled, because the current force is nowhere near enough. He adds that the gate also needs a better emergency network than one simple communicator, then cuts the call with the matter settled. Only after the call does Ruel let out the cough he had been holding back, while the captain throws himself down and begs forgiveness for his earlier behavior. Ruel spares him with a warning to never repeat the mistake, and the captain swears he will guard the gateway like his own body. As they step out, Eris gives the shaken captain one brutal warning look of his own before following Ruel back outside. Ruel notices the difference immediately and asks if Eris feels less nervous now, and Eris admits he does. Ruel starts to say that a crowded place like this should make an attack difficult, but he never finishes the thought. In the next instant, Eris grabs Ruel's clothes and yanks him backward as he draws his sword to intercept a sudden attack. Steel clashes, Ruel loses balance and falls hard onto the ground, and only then does he see the arrow filled with mana that was aimed at him. Ruel bites back his fury as he realizes they are trying this again, and the surrounding guards finally understand what is happening. The gate soldiers rush in late, raising shields around Ruel and shouting for the Lord to be protected as screams break out through the crowd. As panic spreads in every direction, Ruel's mind jumps to one urgent question at the worst possible moment: where is Ganian? At the gate, another attack starts, and Eris immediately shouts that he is still guarding Ruel. The lazy-looking gate soldiers snap into shape and stack their shields around Ruel before he even stands up. Ruel stays put to avoid getting in the way, but he quietly notices that Cassian still has not appeared. Then Eris lights both hands with flame magic, and Ruel is stunned all over again by how gifted his escort really is. Eris splits 6 fire spells and launches them into the unseen threat outside Ruel's line of sight. He follows with 6 blasts of wind, and Ruel quickly realizes Eris is using wind to push the flames harder. While Eris keeps watch, Cassian finally appears behind Ruel and casually admits he came late on purpose just to see what Eris could do. Cassian says Eris roasted several attackers, and he quietly finished off the 2 Eris missed. He also says Ganian is still out there swinging happily, but this time they even captured one attacker alive for interrogation. Ruel orders Cassian to have his people watch the prisoner and start the interrogation before he arrives. When Cassian realizes Ruel expected something like this, his face hardens with brief anger at his own side for missing it. Eris only then notices Cassian has arrived, and the surprise says a lot about how silently he moved. With Cassian's support, Ruel gets up and calmly praises Eris for protecting him. That simple praise hits Eris hard, because for the first time he feels that what he did truly mattered. Eris bows deeply and promises he will keep protecting Ruel from now on. Ruel picks up the sword Eris dropped and hands it back with a blunt lesson: never let go of it again. After the gate incident, the group finally passes inside Masu Forest, where giant black branches and purple leaves make the whole road feel ominous. Ganian gets excited at the forest, while Ruel asks the date because he is worried a beast event might be coming. Cassian reminds Ruel that Tyson and Dryaena already warned them to watch his condition carefully in Masu Forest. Horan appears outside after scouting ahead, salutes the carriage, and the road clears enough for them to keep moving. The mangled beast corpses outside make Ruel feel sick, a harsh reminder that this forest is nothing like a normal outing. After they stop and step out, Cassian explains that the red flags along the road mark the zones where beasts appear most often. Everyone leaves the carriage area and heads toward the Magic Knight's position inside the forest. Ganian bluntly asks why weak little Ruel came at all, and Ruel fires back that the knights are training with him, so they should match his pace. Ganian laughs it off and starts cutting trees and heavy brush out of the way so Ruel can move more easily. Even with help, the uneven forest ground wears Ruel down fast, and he keeps relying on breath just to keep up. Eris awkwardly offers a piggyback ride, which only makes Ganian laugh louder. Instead, Ruel asks Eris to use the spell hold on him and shows Dryaena's bracelet as proof he can safely handle the magic now. Eris finally casts hold, and Ruel lifts into the air with delighted relief. With hold carrying him along, Ruel reaches the Magic Knights far sooner than expected and finds them clearing land and putting up a rough house in the middle of the forest. Dryaena greets Ruel and matter-of-factly reveals that the pile of beast corpses beside the house is her research material. Her eyes shine a little too brightly when she explains she wants to study how Masu Forest beasts differ from beasts in other lands. Ruel stops asking questions and instead orders Horan to unpack everything carefully and avoid injuries while setting up. He quietly adds that every beast they kill should be collected as loot too, because the parts can all be sold for money. Cassian asks if profit was the real goal, and Ruel admits money matters, but this forest is really the best training ground he could give them. Since he wants to explore on his own, Ruel orders Ganian to stay behind and oversee the others' training. Ganian grumbles that he was dragged here to play scarecrow, but he still sits down and agrees because he owes Ruel. Freed from the base, Ruel happily drifts deeper into Masu Forest under hold, treating the whole thing like a private tour of a place he only knew from the novel. When Cassian asks why he came all the way here, Ruel deadpans that he just came for a walk. Then Ruel's mood drops when he realizes he can somehow sense beast positions around him even without seeing them, like an invisible map opening in his head. To test it, Ruel sends Cassian to check one direction, and Cassian confirms beasts really are there. That confirmation should have thrilled him, but instead Ruel is left shaken by the idea that he may have developed a beast-detecting ability. As they keep moving, Ruel notices a cluster of 15 beasts suddenly converging on one point like they are chasing the same prey. Cassian says that kind of beast cooperation should not happen, which only makes Ruel more curious about what is waiting there. Ruel points the way, and Eris starts carrying him toward the strange gathering without hesitation. But as soon as they draw closer, Cassian's expression turns sharp and he orders them to stop because the beasts are swarming there. Ruel reluctantly agrees to turn back, still frustrated that he might miss seeing even one beast up close. Then a sudden impact slams straight into Ruel out of nowhere, and shatters Eris's hold spell. Cassian catches him, but Ruel is already shaking in agony after glimpsing a bright red fox-like thing tearing through him. Right before passing out, Ruel forces out one furious clue: "Fox, damned fox." Cassian immediately cuts the outing short and carries Ruel back, radiating enough anger to make even Eris freeze. When Ruel wakes in the forest base room, the first thing he sees is that same fox-like creature staring right at him. Panic hits as Ruel notices his left arm is splinted, his ribs ache, and small cuts cover his body. Cassian tells him bluntly that the arm is broken, and Ruel snaps back by demanding why that fox is still here. Then the fox speaks directly into Ruel's mind and introduces itself as no fox at all, but a great purifier. The spirit mocks the filth inside Ruel, and Cassian cannot see any of it, which makes Ruel's behavior look even stranger to him. Before anyone can make sense of it, the great purifier taps Ruel and starts sucking black corruption out of his body. Ruel coughs black blood from his mouth and nose as the pain surges so hard that Cassian bolts to fetch help. Ganian, Dryaena, and Eris rush in behind Cassian and find Ruel in agony with blood still on him. After checking him, Ganian says Ruel is strangely a little better even while the pain looks worse than his usual attacks. When Ganian finally sees the little creature, he blurts out "Fox," and the whole room locks onto it. Cassian reacts first and slices its head off without hesitation. The attack does nothing, because the spirit disperses like smoke and reforms with a smug little smile. Dryaena screams that it is a spirit and explains that spirits are normally harmless beings born from nature. That harmless spirit explanation falls apart fast, because Ruel snaps that this thing absolutely crashed into him and caused his injuries. The spirit admits it can touch Ruel because he is different and filled with filth, which makes the process dangerous. Ruel finally snaps, grabs the spirit's huge tail with his good hand, and squeezes until it admits it panicked and flew straight into him. As soon as Ruel lets go, the spirit dives into his arms crying that a pack of beasts suddenly attacked it. Ruel asks for medicine, swallows it through the taste of blood, and only then has enough relief to question the creature properly. Diana confirms again that it is a spirit, but she has no answer for why Ruel can see it even when others normally cannot. The spirit calls itself a great purifier, and says it came because the dirty thing inside Ruel smelled delicious when it was starving. When Ruel asks what it can actually do, the spirit eagerly promises to keep eating the black corruption inside him. Ganian is immediately in favor because even a weak little thing is useful if it can help Ruel. Eris only cares about one question, and he asks if the spirit can heal Ruel's illness. The spirit admits it cannot promise a cure and can only keep devouring the filth as it appears. When Ruel asks how much corruption there is, the spirit cheerfully says there is enough to eat for a lifetime because it keeps coming back. Ruel immediately grabs its head and demands to know why cleanup somehow turned into an all-you-can-eat lifetime plan. Only then does Ruel notice how crowded the tiny room is, because everyone rushed in after hearing he was in trouble. A glance out the window is enough for Ruel to realize training has stalled around his injury, and he refuses to let himself become everyone's priority. He grabs his cane and tries to stand, while Cassian protests that getting up now could make things worse. But the pain has already faded faster than expected, and Ruel insists Diana must not put him ahead of the Magic Knight's work. The spirit hops onto Ruel's shoulder, as if it already belongs there, and Ruel immediately throws it off to make it reflect on what it did to him. Ruel gives the nameless spirit a proper name, Leo, and the little thing accepts it with ridiculous enthusiasm. When Ruel orders Leo to face the wall and reflect, the spirit actually obeys like a scolded child. As Ruel leaves the room, Cassian still distrusts taking in the creature, but Ruel decides Leo is real proof that something can finally pull the disease out of him. Eris bows and apologizes for failing to protect him, but Ruel laughs it off and blames his useless butler instead. Even after the pain and broken bones, Ruel ends this mess more intrigued than afraid, because a spirit hidden from everyone else just appeared and touched him when even Cassian never sensed it. Looking back on Leo, Ruel feels a chill and is honestly relieved that the Great Purifier is such an idiot. Ganian admits he still does not understand spirits, but the only thing that matters to him is that he wants to fight one. Ruel decides to indulge that instinct and quietly promises Ganian a chance, already thinking Leo could become a useful source of endless profit. The moment Ruel steps outside, his mood drops when he finds the knights and magic knights crowded around instead of training. When Ruel asks if staring at him counts as training, Horan bluntly admits everyone stopped because they heard he collapsed. Ruel presses harder by asking if Soteria will collapse whenever he faints, and Horan answers yes without a second of hesitation. That answer makes Ruel furious, because he refuses to let Soteria become a household that depends on one fragile body. He slams his cane down and orders them to think, judge, and move on their own, because they are not puppets and Soteria is supposed to be all of them. The speech lands so hard that Horan and the others start looking at Ruel with pride instead of panic. When Horan asks what that makes Ruel, Ruel dryly calls himself only the shell and says they have to fill it with real strength. Diana immediately protests, and the entire crowd echoes her, but Ruel refuses to back down from his harsh logic. Ruel cuts through the emotion and orders them to stop worrying about him and spend every second getting stronger instead. With Chainall and Tyson backing the order, the knights throw themselves back into training with fresh fire because this command came directly from Ruel. Horan still asks who hurt Ruel so he can push training even harder, but Ruel brushes it off as already handled. Wanting fresh air, Ruel asks Diana to prepare him a seat outside instead of going back indoors. The magic knights start arguing over how luxurious the seat for their lord should be, and Ruel gets uneasy imagining what they might build. Ganian quietly warns Ruel not to keep lowering himself, because to these people he looks more like the sun than a mere shell. Cassian quietly agrees with Ganian, and Ruel decides both of them are being strange. Since he does not want to walk back and forth, Ruel ignores the waiting plan and simply drops onto the stairs outside. Cassian wordlessly covers Ruel's knees with a blanket, and Ruel orders Eris to stop standing like a nervous statue. Hungry from all the noise, Ruel asks for snacks and starts eating while the magic knights are still debating his chair. As he munches through the snacks, Ruel thinks his recovery power is suppressing the disease but never truly removing it, because the sickness keeps growing back larger. That grim balance makes him wonder if keeping the illness in check might be better than trying to erase it completely. Even while brooding, Ruel still wants to see a real monster up close and grumbles that everyone would probably stop him if he tried to hunt one himself. As if answering that thought, Ruel suddenly spots a large monster charging toward the training ground and perks up in real interest. Cassian calmly tells him to move to a safer rock, but Ruel is so curious about the knight's response that he almost does not want to budge. Ruel gets up with his cane and slowly heads toward the rocky safe spot, warning Eris not to step into the fight, while Cassian has already gone to pass along the message. Then everything jolts sideways when a sharp pain stabs through Ruel's ear, and he suddenly freezes mid-step. Blood starts dripping from Ruel's nose, and a strange voice answers as if it heard him call. A crash tears through the trees, and a giant lizard-like monster reveals itself as if it truly came because Ruel wanted one to appear. The pain only gets worse, and Ruel starts fading like he has overused magic even though the mana around his body is not moving. Eris catches him and lifts him at once, trying to get his collapsing lord out of immediate danger. Dozens of flames slam into the monster, but it wipes the attack away with one gesture while that same impossible close voice keeps talking to Ruel alone. The creature insists it came because Ruel wanted it there, and his dazed repetition of me makes the situation even more disturbing. Cassian bursts out of Ruel's shadow, immediately realizing Ruel has entered the same dangerous state as before even though no normal magic has appeared. When Cassian sees the faint light in Ruel's eyes, he realizes Ruel is using some hidden power. Ruel manages to whisper only one command, and the monster obeys at once by turning around and retreating into the forest. The light vanishes from Ruel's eyes, and the moment the monster leaves, he goes limp and faints completely. Cassian understands exactly what he saw, and Eris answers before being asked by swearing he will never betray Ruel. Diana runs over in panic, having also noticed what happened, and begs them to keep Ruel's monster control secret. Cassian presses her for answers, and Diana can only admit she is bound by contract and cannot speak openly. When Cassian asks if Ruel's memory was erased, Diana's sad smile tells him someone did exactly that. Eris anxiously asks if Ruel's memory must be erased again, but Diana pleads that his body cannot endure that now, even with his new resistance. Ruel wakes at dawn to Leo slapping his face and launching into a scolding about chasing food, breaking his arm, and acting like an idiot. Ruel shuts Leo up and immediately asks Cassian whether the monster was real, because he knows what happened in his head was no hallucination. Cassian tells him the monster fled and Ganian chased after it, still thrilled enough to go cut it down himself. When Ruel asks who saw the truth, Cassian confirms only Eris and Diana noticed, which is the first real relief Ruel feels. Ruel pieces the mystery together, and realizes the old Ruel must have used this same power to save Diana and the others before his memories were erased. After hearing that training continued even when he collapsed, Ruel decides the test worked and orders an immediate return to the mansion. Back in Soteria territory, Ruel wastes no time and sends Cassian ahead to inspect village barracks while he visits them one by one himself. At Sissel and the other villages, Ruel praises improvement where he sees it, but Ganian and the two Night Corps still keep tearing apart weak barracks to force real standards. Ganian ends up enjoying the whole process so much that he starts leading the inspections on his own by the third round. Once they reach Aper, Ruel stops at the merchants of Beto, sells the monster loot, and turns the swollen profits straight into equipment funds for his knights. Later, just as Ruel is about to change and rest, Ganian barges into his room because he has one last request before leaving. Ruel calmly sits him down for tea, and Ganian admits he really is leaving now because Soteria has stabilized and his own duty is waiting. Ganian says his time in Soteria was fun, with only one complaint: Eris still never called him teacher. He also apologizes for not staying to catch the rat with Ruel, and Ruel coolly points out Ganian would already be under pressure from his own country if he delayed any longer. Before parting, Ganian asks to see the legendary Turbulent Day sword, and Ruel immediately orders Cassian to bring it. Cassian clearly hates the idea, but he still returns with the sword while Ruel calmly keeps the conversation moving. Ganian lights up the moment he sees the Turbulent Day sword, and Ruel quietly judges from that reaction that the fake heirloom has passed its first test. Ruel lets Ganian handle it, but only after making him wear Cassian's white gloves so he never touches the blade barehanded. Once unsheathed, the sword looks beautifully ancient and perfectly preserved, which only makes the forgery more convincing. Ganian tests the workmanship with a few swings, and Ruel quietly notices the dangerous curiosity in his eyes. Even after catching Cassian's worried look, Ruel silently allows it and lets Ganian do whatever he wants with the fake relic. Ganian finally pours blue aura into the blade and excitedly praises it for holding together under power for a split second. Then the sword splits clean in half right in his hands before he can even finish the sentence. The room goes cold as Ruel sets down his teacup and stares at Ganian with a furious smile. Ruel calmly informs Ganian that he now owes him one more debt for breaking the Soteria family heirloom. Ganian is shaken when Ruel treats the whole heirloom issue like a minor formality, and refuses any extra payment. When Ganian swears he will repay Ruel even if it means betraying his country, Ruel silently accepts the oath and decides more debt on the future hero is good for his own survival. Later, Ruel happily studies his growing pile of paperwork and grins over a simple plan: train knights in Masu Forest, sell the materials through Beto, and let the money keep rolling in. Cassian cuts into that good mood by reminding him he is still sick, and Ruel casually admits his fever is high and he is pushing himself too hard again. Leo suddenly zooms in and sprawls over Ruel, and Cassian instantly starts mocking the fox spirit for acting like a spoiled pet instead of a guardian. Cassian keeps tearing into Leo for roaming the mansion and living off attendant snacks, while Ruel quietly admits the resentment makes sense because everyone else has been working non-stop. Ruel drops the argument and decides Ganian should leave with a present, which is really in order to bring him to the training center for a test with Leo. Before the match, Ruel checks whether Leo can even fight, and the well-fed spirit admits he never had the chance before but now believes he finally can. At the training ground, Ganian draws his sword with open excitement because he is about to fight a spirit for the first time, while Ruel lounges off to the side like this is entertainment. Ruel settles in to watch with a meat pie while Tyson eagerly prepares to record the match, and nearby Cassian gives Eris a quick warning that spirits are nothing like wizards. Once the match starts, Leo slams his paws down and spikes a stone thorn up under Ganian, proving his element control is real. Ganian slips through the attack so easily that he appears right in front of Leo and taps the spirit on the forehead like the fight is a game. Stung by that humiliation, Leo launches Ganian skyward with erupting earth and grows a tree blade from the ground to strike him in midair. Ganian finally swings his sword, cuts the attack apart, and lands cleanly while strolling through more rising rocks without any trouble. After another humiliating flick, Leo explodes in anger and summons fire, lightning, and wind together, and even the watchers are stunned by how overwhelming a spirit can look. Then the whole spectacle dies in an instant because Leo runs out of fuel and flops over whining that he is hungry. Laughing off the Aniclimax, Ganian carries Leo back and sums him up as a child with a magic sword, dangerous power, but no real idea how to fight. Ruel takes the result as good enough and starts thinking that this troublesome fox now needs a proper collar. After Ganian leaves the mansion, Ruel finally collapses back onto his bed and the price of overworking himself hits him with coughing and dizziness. Still sick in bed, Ruel keeps issuing orders by telling Cassian to remake the fake heirloom, then turns to Leo and starts pressing the spirit for answers about its kind and whether it can survive without him. Ruel questions Leo about the filthy black substance inside his body and learns almost nothing except that other great purifiers exist and abandoned Leo behind. Ruel presses harder and makes Leo admit the real bind. If he cannot feed on Ruel's corruption, the spirit will slowly fade back into nature. When Ruel says he trusts no one, Leo argues that Ruel still chose him by giving him a name, and for a spirit that name already works like a leash. Ruel is genuinely rattled that Leo trusted him on first sight, and the moment turns ugly when a coughing fit cuts him off and Leo eagerly starts feeding on the corruption again. As Leo tears black filth out of Ruel's body like a meal, Ruel endures the pain through clenched teeth and Cassian still cannot see what the spirit is devouring. Leo briefly lets Cassian see the truth, and the sight of Ruel's body packed with black corruption is so disgusting that Cassian nearly loses his appetite on the spot. When Ruel vomits black blood again, Cassian catches it at once and finally accepts that Leo is necessary, even if the feeding is only a temporary fix. By the next day, Ruel insists he feels refreshed and tries to prove it by walking around, but Cassian bluntly points out the lingering fever and Leo's overeager defense only makes the excuse worse. Ruel refuses to rest because the rats are hiring adventurers, and he decides now is the time to throw bait instead of waiting any longer. He explains the real reason for going himself. He has to find out why Satyria's ears ended up with the rats, and Cassian starts naming possible traitors while Ruel keeps the strongest clue to himself. Ruel settles the argument by saying the answer will be obvious soon, because tonight is too good a chance to pass up. The mood lightens for a second when Ruel starts talking about meat and ice cream like a healthy patient, which is enough for Cassian to decide maybe bed rest is still the least dangerous option. After Cassian leaves, Ruel calls in Billo because the captured dogs need to be made to talk and he does not trust Cassian to interrogate anyone without simply killing them. Billo confirms he can handle torture, and his polished answer only makes Ruel think again that Cassian could learn something from a real butler. Ruel also warns Billo he may be gone from the estate for a while, because he has decided he can no longer leave Satyria's dirty rats alone. Billo reluctantly agrees to hold the estate together, but he makes it clear that if Ruel comes back hurt again, the scolding will be much worse next time. That night, the covert trip begins under darkness, with Chainall and Tyson left behind to guard the mansion, while Estelle sends Ruel off with snacks. Inside the carriage, the disguise is simple but effective because Ruel and Cassian are finally dressed like ordinary people instead of nobles. Ruel immediately ruins the silent mood by trying and failing to lift his sword one-handed, which gives Cassian an easy excuse to call him a useless poser. Since Ruel clearly cannot pass as a capable adventurer in a fight, Eris volunteers to take the frontline role instead. Ruel explains that Flen will fake their careers with silver plaques, and until the rats bite, Eris should focus on flashy, high-profile jobs. Ruel also gives Leo a job. If the spirit cannot fight properly, then he can at least shield Ruel with earth whenever danger closes in. Once the roles are set, Ruel uses the ride to rest because he knows he has to save every scrap of stamina for what comes next. At the hand of the Wind Guild, Flen quietly pushes the operation forward by showing them the available requests and handing over 3 silver adventurer plaques as if this shortcut is nothing. Flen spots Ruel's broken arm and immediately offers medicine, but Ruel cuts him off and refuses any healing before they continue the guild business. Flen then points out a problem nobody solved earlier. Even in plain clothes, Ruel's face is memorable enough to ruin the whole disguise. A magical face-changing spell is ruled out because Ruel's body cannot handle that kind of mana, so they need something simpler. Flen fixes the disguise problem by producing a white fox mask, a magic item that hides Ruel's eye color and locks in place even if someone strikes him. While Flen shows gratitude through the gift, Ruel quietly enjoys the more important part. His investment in Flen and the guild is finally paying off beautifully. The group turns back to the requests, and Ruel immediately filters for the most dangerous. best paying jobs because bait only works if it looks worth taking. Cassian pushes Eris harder by choosing an even deadlier request that includes killing, and Eris surprises Ruel by accepting it despite his usually gentle image. With the jobs chosen and the mask in hand, Ruel's side heads out, while Flynn stays behind staring at the ugly request they removed from his desk and realizes he now owes Ruel yet another favor. Left alone, Flynn briefly considers giving Ruel something for the fox, then decides medicine is the better gift because with Ruel, health is the thing that matters most. As Ruel's coughing flares up again, Cassian covers his mouth with a magic handkerchief and presses Leo for overfeeding him with the black substance. One breath of breath stops the fit at once, and Ruel grimly jokes that at least this proves the treatment works. Cassian says he will form a special trusted team around Ruel, and Ruel approves because this job is too important to leave to just anyone. Before leaving, Cassian orders Leo to protect Ruel no matter what, and Leo solemnly promises even though he has never protected anyone before. After hearing Eris approaching outside, Cassian heads out, leaving Ruel alone to endure the pain and keep taking breath by himself. Ruel refuses help even from the hidden guard, takes the medicine himself, and immediately collapses onto the bed unconscious. Half awake later, Ruel remembers Tyson's ring and necklace and realizes his uncle may be protecting him remotely through them. A woman's voice abruptly wakes him in the dark, and she reveals herself as one of Cassian's shadows with bad news: the enemy has arrived. The shadow operative scoops Ruel up and jumps out the window as steel clashes back inside the inn. Even while being carried through the dark, Ruel notices how blind the battlefield feels and realizes his cane was left behind in the inn. When a mana-coated dagger flies at them, Hina parries it mid-run and coolly asks the one thing she needs from Ruel: can he stay put? Ruel thanks her on the move and immediately turns it into a job offer, only for Hina to deadpan that what she really wants is a vacation. At a dead end, Hina drops Ruel with 2 more shadows and finally gives her name and rank. She is Hina, the Vice Guild Master. Left with guards at his back, Ruel orders Leo to protect him, and the little beast puffs up with proud determination. The next attacker answers at once with a huge fireball, and Leo slams down an earthen wall to shield Ruel from the blast. As fighting and dust close in around them, Leo wraps Ruel inside a thick earth dome, but something powerful starts smashing through it from the other side. When the cracked dome reveals a swordsman with red eyes and murderous aura, Ruel freezes under the pressure just as Tyson's necklace activates on its own. A translucent shield blooms from the necklace and blocks the strike meant for Ruel. Leo charges in shouting that no one can steal his prey, and a burst of lightning blasts the attacker backward. Then Tyson's ring joins in, firing a volley of ice arrows at the airborne killer and proving Ruel's uncle is watching this fight from afar. Leo finishes the setup by growing a tree under the attacker to bind him in place, and the next volley of ice arrows drills straight through his head. With the assassin dead, Cassian and Hina reappear, and Cassian returns the cane Hina forgot to bring when she snatched Ruel out the window. Ruel praises Leo, checks on Eris, and learns the rest of the fight went fine while Cassian lightly jokes that the attackers clearly hate him. To find out who sent them, Hina drags in a surviving captive with shattered limbs and drops him at Ruel's feet. Cassian forces a truth drug into the prisoner's mouth, explaining these people do not talk without help. Under the drug, the man blurts out the mission plainly: kill Ruel Soteria. When pressed for who he serves, the prisoner only says for him, which tells Ruel this enemy does not match the noble faction from Ganian's original storyline. The next answer finally gives the group a name: Red Ash. Then the prisoner starts ranting that everything began because Ruel is still alive, and the vicious aura behind those words makes Ruel shiver. Before the rant can go further, Cassian cuts his throat and ends the interrogation on the spot. Shaken and frustrated, Ruel has to steady himself with breath while wondering why people are trying so hard to kill a side character who should have died early. When soldiers approach far faster than usual, Ruel's mood eases a little, and he leaves the cleanup to Cassian's people. After that night, Cassian and Eris start sweeping up the hand of the Wind Guild's richest and most dangerous requests, throwing the adventurer world into chaos. Ruel wants that uproar, so when Flynn brings the complaints, he simply has Cassian pay people off to keep the noise under control. Sure, the bait is finally set, Ruel predicts the request he really wants will arrive any day now. The next chapter opens with Flynn stunned that Ruel called it right just before the request came in. Ruel explains he handpicked 3 people for this job because rumors about his team are already doing half the work for him. Reading the client name, Ruel instantly sees the real target. Plain the merchant is one of the rats he wanted to catch. The job says to move valuable goods, and Ruel is almost sure the cargo is really drugs hidden behind a respectable request. He tells Flynn to accept it at once and reaches to Cassian for the disguise mask he will need. Eris worries because Ruel insists on going personally again, but Ruel only says they will need him to tease the rat properly. Fully disguised and energized, Ruel heads out for the mission like he is going on an adventure. At the meeting point, Plain introduces himself, and Ruel answers under the fake name Han with Cassian and Eris posed as his party. Ruel deliberately makes sure Plain notices his arm injury and cane, baiting the merchant into underestimating him. Plain points out the cargo wagon and explains it must be moved quietly through dangerous territory because the goods are supposedly too precious to risk. When Ruel checks the map, He realizes the route runs through Masu Forest toward the neutral zone, which could mean a real base is waiting there. As the others stare at the visibly injured adventurer, Eris's mere presence scares the merchant crew into backing off. Ruel sees that the wagon is miserable for an injured body, so Cassian starts laying down a fur-covered rug to soften the ride. The merchant crew blocks him and sneers that an adventurer should just endure it, making their contempt far too obvious. Ruel answers the cliché with his own, giving Eris permission to make them listen. Eris does not even draw his sword. One brutal open-handed slap knocks the loudest one unconscious and terrifies the rest. With the crew suddenly obedient, Ruel cheerfully takes their silence as permission and settles in for what he calls a happy trip. On the road, Ruel is pleased to see the gate guards checking identities properly this time, proof that his earlier crackdown changed something. Even with layers of rugs, the ride hurts, and the crew shrink into the corner under the silent pressure of Cassian and Eris watching them. Ruel quietly signals Cassian with his lips. When monsters show up, make the merchant men look like they died to monsters. When a monster pack approaches, Leo senses it first. Eris draws his sword, and the panicking crew suddenly beg the same people they mocked for help. Ruel calmly sends Cassian and Eris out while he stays behind as the wagon keeper, already counting the 5 monsters closing in. The fight outside is short, and when only Cassian and Eris return, the merchant crew are gone for good. Cassian smoothly reports that the merchant men were torn apart by monsters, and Ruel follows the script as the wounded survivor whose condition got worse in the fight. Eris grows quiet after measuring himself against monsters like Cassian and Ganian, and Ruel notices the slump before that self-doubt hardens. Ruel tells Eris plainly that no matter what anyone says, Eris is his escort, and that simple trust steadies him at once. With Eris driving more confidently, Ruel finally lies down beside Leo and lets the 2 monsters guarding him handle the rest of the road. At the neutral zone destination, the receiving supervisor is stunned to hear every merchant escort died and only the cargo survived. Ruel doubles down on the act with a real coughing fit and a hoarse voice, saying he barely protected the wagon and got hurt doing it. The supervisor's side inspects the wagon for missing cargo, unaware Ruel's group already found the hidden drugs and put them back exactly where they were. Among the hidden cargo, Ruel has already confirmed Prezio is mixed in, tying this route back to the drug that ruined Carbina. Once the confirmation card is finally handed over, Cassian and Eris walk Ruel away while their own shadow operative stays attached to the wagon's trail. Now sure the shipment will lead them home, Ruel says the real work starts here because the rats have dug too many holes across Soteria. Cassian answers by preparing to contact Horan, Diana, and the Barons, turning Ruel's trap into a broader purge. Ruel reveals this was why he kept sending the same 2 knights through Masu Forest. He wanted the rat network to grow used to them and drop its guard before tonight's cleanup. Deep in his underground cave, Plain watches gold and silver pour in and savors the thought of Soteria collapsing under the trap he spent years digging. He remembers Ruel returning to Soteria and quietly vows to uncover what the young lord is planning before the house is swallowed whole. A subordinate reports that the wagon has arrived, and Plain casually treats the hired adventurers as disposable tools he can kill later if they become inconvenient. Plain leads his man to the heart of the base, and opens a heavy metal safe layered with magic devices. Inside, mountains of drugs fill the vault, and Plain nearly trembles with joy imagining nobles and knights alike rotting from them. A tapping sound cuts through Plain's fantasy, and when he spins around, Han is suddenly there inside the cave. Ruel thanks Plain for showing his hand, then orders the whole stash burned without hesitation. The safe erupts in a violent blast, and Ruel watches the fire with grim satisfaction, while Leo bounces around him in triumph. Plain drops to his knees in shock as years of collected poison burn to ash right in front of him. When the servant beside him panics, Ruel gives Eris a single cue, and Eris instantly cuts the servant down. Eris flicks the blood from his blade and sets the tip at Plain's throat just as Plain's armed men rush in at the sound of the explosion. For one furious second Plain begs to be killed, but the sight of the burned drugs drags him back into pure hatred for Ruel. Plain remembers Han claiming he was still injured, pieces together the distances in the room, and realizes Ruel looks almost defenseless behind Eris. He snarls that he will kill Ruel, and Eris answers by driving his sword straight into Plain's leg. Even screaming in pain, Plain orders his men to seize Ruel, and Eris forces himself to obey Ruel's earlier instruction to stay calm instead of rushing in blindly. One enemy presses a sword to Ruel's neck, but Eris keeps moving exactly as taught and refuses to drop his own blade. Eris tears into the men around Ruel with brute force and controlled fury, fighting like a beast instead of a boy. Trusting the sword Ruel gave him, Eris smashes through an opponent's weapon and keeps advancing until the gang starts whispering that he is a monster. Seeing his men lose ground, Plain splits them in two and has one group drag Ruel away while the rest hold Eris back. Only after Ruel is taken does Cassian appear from the shadows carrying a severed head, furious but still following Ruel's reckless plan. Cassian reminds Eris that Ruel's order is to wipe out the base and seal every escape route so the real masterminds cannot be warned. Eris hates it, but he obeys, and Cassian heads off to finish the slaughter after trusting Hina to move on her own. Elsewhere in the cave, Ruel lets Plain believe he still has a chance, because cornered rats are easier to control when they think they can turn the table. Plain smashes Ruel in the face, and Leo nearly bursts out in anger, but Ruel stops him because the timing still is not right. Ruel takes the blow without giving Plane the scream he wants, and that quiet endurance only makes Plane nastier. When Ruel's cane rolls away, Plane tries to break it in front of him to deepen the humiliation. Instead, the cane refuses to break, and Ruel almost laughs because Cassian made it absurdly sturdy. Ruel finally tells Plane to rethink the situation, and the pale blue shield crest blooming on the back of his hand reveals that Han is actually Sateria's lord. One man crumbles in fear, but Plane forcibly recovers and twists the revelation into a chance to seize the lord himself. Plane orders the rest of his men gathered through the tunnels and tells them to search Ruel for any tracking magic before the knights can arrive. Ruel warns the men that mana entering his body could kill him, trying to stop them from testing him with magic while he is still trapped. Plane grabs the breath at Ruel's neck anyway, suspects it is a signaling tool, and yanks away the lifeline that keeps Ruel breathing. Ruel's breathing slows at once, but before Plane can enjoy it, reports start coming in that none of the other tunnels are answering. Plane tries every communicator himself, and when every line stays dead, panic finally starts cracking through his rage. Desperate, Plane lifts Ruel by the throat and demands answers, and the weakening Ruel only manages to call Leo's name. Using all the cave's moisture, Leo gathers a storm of water droplets and unleashes them at Plane's group. Right then Hina steps in, and Leo's barrage blasts Plane and the others backward across the cave floor. Hina calmly picks up the breath and gives it back to Ruel, dryly joking that Cassian would call dropping it part of the plan. Ruel gets his breath back, and Leo fusses over him so hard that Ruel covers the little spirit's eyes before Hina starts killing the survivors. With Ruel's permission, Hina walks toward the fallen gang and asks if leaving only one mouth to speak will be enough. The men are too terrified to even rise, and Hina's voice turns deadly soft as she starts cutting them down one by one. Ruel tells Plane the rest of his tunnel forces are already dead, because Plane was too excited by his capture to notice the net closing around him. Plane tries to deny it, but his own maze-like tunnel system becomes proof that no rescue is coming and that gathering everyone only trapped them faster. As Plane mentally retraces every mistake, he realizes too late that grabbing Han was the moment his life actually ended. Cassian returns from the shadows ahead of schedule, more worried about Ruel than interested in finishing the cleanup first. The second Cassian sees breath in Ruel's hand instead of at his neck, his smile turns into the kind only an assassin wears. He instantly kicks Plane so hard that the man flies, then rides him into the ground and tears his face across the cave floor. Cassian grabs Plane by the neck and begins the interrogation with one cold question: "Who is your owner?" When Plane hesitates, Cassian cuts off his useless leg and repeats the question until the answer finally breaks out. Plane confesses that Liberin in Prios is behind the scheme to bring Sateria down with drugs. Asked about Red Ash, Plane can only say he does not know, because he was just following orders in exchange for ruling this underground pit. Ruel tells Cassian to stop the bleeding for now, because Plane still has more value alive than dead. Ruel guesses Eris is already tearing through Plane's room for money and documents, because Eris never forgets what might profit Sateria. He thanks Leo and Hina for the rescue, and Leo practically spins apart from pride at being useful. Then Cassian notices Ruel's swollen face and asks the obvious question with dangerous calm. Ruel shrugs it off and says he will feel better after hitting Plane himself, then casually praises the ridiculous durability of the cane. That only brings out what Cassian really wants to say. Why did Ruel treat his own life as bait for trash like this? Ruel answers honestly that Sateria matters that much, because if those drugs had spread, the house would have been finished. Cassian tells him that as Lord he should stand back and command, not throw himself forward as bait ever again. Ruel gives ground just enough to keep the peace, promising to command from behind next time unless his own doubts force him to see things firsthand. Once the lecture ends, Cassian helps him stand, and Ruel limps over to Plane for the one repayment he still wants. Ruel swings the cane down onto Plane's head and takes back the hit with grim satisfaction. Leo immediately joins in with tiny furious kicks, and Ruel jokes that maybe he finally gains some muscle after all. That thought immediately drifts into dangerous ideas about training his resistance with poison, and both Cassian and Leo catch the look on his face at once. Later that night back at the mansion, Ruel lies in bed with Plane's documents still in hand, already buried in the scale of the cleanup ahead. The papers show just how deeply the rats spread through merchants and shops, and the sheer number of cuts still needed starts pounding at his head. He thanks Horan and Dryana for their work, and Cassian hands them heavy purses as a proper reward and a rare comfortable day off. When Dryana asks about the remaining seized drugs, Ruel orders all of them burned after the evidence is secured. After they leave, Ruel has Cassian bring in the people whose treatment is finished, because Eris found one more secret hidden under Plane's wreckage. In the dark room, Ruel realizes Eris found one of Sateria's lost ears, an abandoned intelligence survivor. The man who enters is missing one eye and stands like a condemned sinner, unable to believe he was brought back before Ruel instead of discarded forever. Ruel's first question cuts straight to the wound. If they knew he had returned, why did they never come back to him? Dion answers with raw despair. Failed spies are meant to be thrown away, so they stayed where Plane imprisoned them and prepared only for a final end. Then Dion reveals the deeper rot. The former lord's fatal wagon accident happened because some of Sateria's own ears betrayed him. Ruel coldly asks if Dion at least got revenge, and Dion says only half of it, because he never managed to kill Plane himself. Ruel tells him the revenge is already farther along than he knows. Plane is caught, the rats are dead, and the hand behind them has been named. Then he gives Dion a real choice: cling to that filthy prison of failure, or look up and go after what is still hanging above them. Dion admits the truth at last. He is afraid, because if Ruel falls, Soteria loses its last flame. Ruel answers with irritation instead of comfort, saying he hates people who give up before they even try, and tells Dion to get out if that is all he has left. At the door, Dion realizes all those old claims about never returning were lies, because every one of them had still wanted to come home if Ruel truly called them back. So Dion turns back with his voice shaking and asks the question he really came to ask: can he return? Ruel refuses to beg for him and simply repeats the choice, forcing Dion to say the truth with his own mouth. Dion finally says it outright. He wants to come back to his hometown, to everything he once belonged to. Ruel accepts him with a simple okay, and Dion drops to both knees to greet him as the restored head of Soteria's intelligence. Ruel renames the old ears as birds, and when he asks Dion to gather information for him, Dion answers with full loyalty that they exist for their lord. Ruel decides Soteria's newly released birds still need a leash, so he orders Cassian to bind them with mana oaths never to betray the house. He makes the rule harsher right away: anyone who refuses the oath is an enemy, and Cassian is to kill them. Ruel extends the leash to Dion too, making even this useful ally swear a mana oath to Soteria.